Okay, looks like our join rate has stabilized. So with that, I'm going to review some administrative items. So my name is Alan Belniak, and for this evening's meeting, I'm going to help facilitate the technology portion of the meeting. If we were not in a pandemic, we would all be meeting in person, but that's not the case. So we're doing things safely. And so we're going to meet online through this Zoom meeting, this Zoom webinar. A couple of things to keep in mind. Where the project team in just a moment is going to step through a handful of slides to talk about the project. And then we'd like to open it up for public comment and questions and answers. So what we'd like to do after we do some initial introductions and acknowledgements of some folks in the audience, we'll then go through the presentation itself. And then we will move into the Q&A portion. And we're accepting Q&A and commentary in a couple of different ways. For one, you can use the Q&A button down below in the Zoom controls. And that quite literally lets you submit a question. And when we get to the Q&A and commentary portion, we will read the question aloud, and a member of the project team will answer the question. Or if it's a comment, then we'll at least just read it off into the record just so everyone can hear it. If you'd like to come off the microphone and share your question or comment verbally, you can use the raise hand feature also down below. It looks like someone's giving you a high five. What that does, it sends a command to me that you would like to speak. And then what we'll do is when your hand is raised at the right time, I'll call out your name, help you unmute your microphone. And then you'll have an opportunity to speak. And then what we are, because we're going to have a handful of people speaking this evening. So we're going to ask that you keep your question, your comment to about 2 minutes in length. And that's just to make sure we give everyone an opportunity to speak their mind and share their comments. If you'd like to come back on and ask a secondary question or comment, we encourage you to do so, but just please be respectful of the 2-minute limit, just to give everyone an equal chance. A couple other administrative notes. This meeting is being recorded for archival purposes. So if that's not something you're comfortable with, now would be a good time to exit the meeting. I'll say that again once more when we start the Q&A period, just in case anyone joins late, and also as a reminder. Also, this meeting is being closed captioned. So if that's a feature that you would like to turn on, you can look for the closed caption button down below, and you can enable those subtitles to see some text-based notifications throughout the evening. So with that, I'd like to hand the speaking rights over to Brian to walk us through how this meeting is going to work. Brian?
Thanks, Alan. Hi, everyone. So first off, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. So my name is Brian Cordero. I work for Mass DOT Highway Division's Environmental Services section, and tonight I'll be serving as the MC for the meeting. And before we get into the presentation, I want to have the project team introduce themselves. I want to give them that ability. So Alan, can you go to the next slide? So we'll be going in the same order as the slide shown, starting with Alex, since I've already introduced myself. So go ahead, Alex.
Thanks, Brian. Good evening. My name is Alex Fagnan. I'm a designer with Ty & Bond. I've been working on this project for several years, and I'm going to focus on some of the design elements in just a few minutes.
Jamie?
Oh, sorry about that. Hold on. My name is Jamison Harwood. I'm working on the video here. I'm the MassDOT archaeologist, and I'll be presenting the archaeological section tonight. There we go. Now I got it. So once again, I'm Jamison Harwood, MassDOT archaeologist. Thank you.
And I'm Andy Paul. I'm the MassDOT highway design engineer. I'll be answering questions, but not participating in the presentation portion.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Corey O'Connor. I'm a traffic operations engineer for Massachusetts Highway Department, Mass DOT. I'll be around for the question portion of the presentation.
Hi, I'm Rich Massey. I'm the Mass DOT Highway Division District 2 Project Development Engineer, and I've been working on this project since the city initiated it.
Hi, I'm Samantha Roddy. I'm with BHB, and I'm helping with the public outreach process.
All right, so that's it. There are a few more people as part of our team, and they'll introduce themselves if need be. So now that intros are out of the way, I'd first like to allow for any elected officials that may be here to introduce themselves or say any remarks before we get started, the presentation portion. So since everyone is automatically muted in the Zoom call, you can let us know if you'd like to introduce yourself, That's for elected officials by raising your hand or using the raise hand feature, or you can just type into the Q&A box so we can unmute you and you have the floor.
Great, thank you, Brian. So at the moment, I see one hand raised. And just a quick note, there was one hand raised prior to this. I did lower your hand just to let you know that it's not that I'm ignoring you. I just want to make sure we clearly identified elected officials. So with that, Mayor, I'm going to send a command to you to open your microphone. And if you'd like, feel free to take yourself off mute and please share a comment with the group. Hello, welcome.
Good evening, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Excellent, good evening. I'm Mayor David Narkowitz from the city of Northampton. I'd like to first off thank you. Thanks to MassDOT and your team for holding this hearing. I just wanted to briefly acknowledge the history of this project and the fact that the city has been very interested in making this unsafe intersection safer, and have been working with MassDOT for several years and trying to do that at the Hatfield Street, North King Street intersection. Also want to say that the city has been very much in favor of modern roundabouts, and it is our preferred intersection treatment dating back to the early 2000s. And this would represent the fourth modern roundabout that has been developed in the city of Northampton. Beginning with obviously the Florence roundabout at Route 9 and Bridge Road, the Con Street and Pleasant Street roundabout, the almost recently completed, still under construction, but functioning well, the Damon Road Route 9 exit 19 roundabout, and again this would be the fourth one in the city. Currently, the intersection has no bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. It's very unsafe, particularly for left-hand turning movements. And the city, again, has a strong support for making this intersection not only safer for cars, but also for creating bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. We continue to see desire lines from people who walk along this route, walking in and around the intersection. And so it's been a longstanding interest. We understand and respect and trust that there is an ongoing historic preservation review process underway with the federal, state, and tribal review process. We obviously respect and want to have that process run through. But again, I just want to say that from the city's perspective, our interest is in making this intersection safe. And we believe that the modern roundabout is the best choice, not only from a safety standpoint, but obviously from a congestion mitigation, and ultimately from a climate perspective, where roundabouts have been shown to lower greenhouse gas emissions because they eliminate idling cars. So we support it. But again, we want to make sure that that appropriate mitigation with regard to the archaeological sites are achieved. And if so, we would love to see this project, this TIP project with federal funds completed. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that, Mayor. And later on, when we get to the Q&A portion and commentary portion, after we've gone through the presentation, we welcome you once again to come off mute and share your thoughts. Okay, so with that, Brian, I don't see any other hands raised for elected officials. So with that, I believe you can continue.
Okay, thanks, Alan. And thank you, Mayor, for the remarks. Could you move to the next slide, Alan? So the purpose of tonight's meeting will be to build upon the information that MassDOT provided in the project website. And I hope you've all had a chance to check that out before joining us tonight. In addition to that, the project team tonight will be presenting on some of the key details regarding the project's history, the design and the alternatives selection process that we went through for the project. We'll go over the archaeology with Jamie's portion of the presentation. And then we'll also talk about the ongoing public engagement process that MassDOT is carrying out. And after our presentation, we've allotted the majority of our time, hopefully towards the Q&A session, where we're going to do our best to answer your questions. Next slide. So once MassDOT had reviewed all the comments that was issued through the MEPA comment period, which a lot of you are probably familiar with, it became clear that we needed to do more outreach and engagement for the project. Since then, Mass DOT has developed, put together a project website and informational platform, and opened up a comment portal for anyone who wants to submit their comments to the project. And I'll mention this again later, but I do want to let everyone know that Mass DOT is intending to keep the public comment period open until March 8th. So if you want to send us a comment after tonight's meeting, please do so by then. We've also been in receipt of a lot of other public comments issued through the MIPA process, and also those that have been sent to me via email. These comments, I want to let you know, they're going to be considered equally to the comments that are issued through Mass DOT's public comment portal. And to date, all of the comments that have been received, they've helped us develop the content for the informational website, as well as what we're going to speak about tonight. Next slide. So now we're going to move over to the design and alternatives portion of the presentation, where I'll allow Alex Fagnan from Ty and Bond to take over. Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, as I said briefly in my introduction, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes or so going over a project overview, talking about some of the project development history, and looking at some of the design alternatives, just to provide some context for the conversation tonight. Next slide, please, Alan. So I have a feeling most people on the call are aware, but this project is located at the intersection of North King Street and Hatfield Street on the north side of the city. The project is largely an intersection improvement at that location. However, the project limits do extend from North King Street down by Big Y up to just beyond the River Valley Market, and also on Hatfield Street from Cook Ave to the intersection. Next slide, please. So the project overview. First off, why are we doing a project here? This intersection has a history of severe crashes, T-bone right angle crashes. And I would say that's the primary driver and motivation to do an intersection improvement at this location. In addition, there are operational issues. I'm sure folks in town have had a hard time taking a turn off Hatfield Street during peak commuter periods, particularly during pre-COVID time. And we also, we lack pedestrian and bicycle accommodation and proper ADA accommodation at this location. The proposed condition is to realign Hatfield Street and construct a modern roundabout, which I guess is a little bit of a spoiler because we're going to talk design alternatives in a few minutes. But I think it's well established that this is proposed as a modern roundabout at this point. And just a bit on the project status, the design is complete and coordination is ongoing. There's two pieces of coordination ongoing. One is the FHWA Section 106 coordination, which Jamie's going to dig into a little bit more after I finish my part of the presentation. And the other is MassDOT's continuing public outreach, which Brian just kind of reviewed and obviously tonight is a key component of. Next slide, please. So this project did start back in 2009 timeframe when some studies were done of the intersection to try to figure out, what was going on from a safety perspective. And the project was formally initiated in 2011, which is when Mass DOT effectively approved the project to go forward. In 2012, there was a public workshop where abutters and people were invited to come in and discuss possible treatments here. And then preliminary design started. In 2017, there was a design public hearing where the preliminary design was presented. And then there was an opportunity for the public to comment. And then through the next couple of years, the design was completed and a construction contract was awarded in early 2020. In summer 2020, though, however, everything was halted and some of the concerns came forward and this public process has been playing out since that time. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about alternatives and we're going to stay a little bit high level, but I'll try to give enough detail to make sure that we cover the things that have been thought about on this project. So there primarily were 4 alternatives and I'll talk about each one a little bit more. But a no build, 2 signalized concepts, and a modern roundabout. When we do alternatives analyses, we try to set a consistent criteria to evaluate each alternative by so that we come out, objectively to the best engineering solution for a particular location. In this case, or really in all cases, those considerations include operations. So we're thinking about, delay, really, how long are you stuck at that intersection when you're trying to get through it? We think about safety, quantifiably, that tends to be crashes. However, what contributes to the crashes? Sight lines, speed, things like that. We look at accommodation, pedestrian, bicycle, motor vehicle, ADA, any transit if it's appropriate, buses, school buses. And we look at constructability, traffic impacts, land impacts, cost, all those types of factors. On this particular project, there were two separate alternative analyses that were done. In 2013, with the preliminary design, there was what's called a functional design report, which stepped through a series of alternatives and criteria. And then in response to public comment in 2017, there was also an intersection control evaluation, which is, a similar alternatives analysis that also stepped through a series of alternatives. So just back to those alternatives briefly, a no build is an alternative that's always included. It's what it sounds like. We basically look at a existing intersection or project and we say, what happens if we do nothing over the next 15 years? We project traffic out, we take a look at how operations and safety are going to behave over that time period, and it kind of becomes a baseline for the rest of the analysis. We looked at a Y configuration signalized intersection. So, this is an intersection that would, at the end of the day, look very similar to the existing one, except the stop control would be replaced with a signal. When you start thinking about the Y configuration and the skewed approach, and you think back to the stated purpose and need of this project, which is a safety improvement due to some right angle crashes, this alternative doesn't really provide for those safety benefits. Signalized intersections in general do not mitigate for those T-bone accidents when somebody hits you right in the driver's side door or something like that. A signalized intersection is not shown to mitigate for that factor, and that's a key existing issue at this intersection that needs to be accounted for. We looked at a T configuration signalized intersection too, which would involve kind of sweeping Hatfield Street up a little bit and bringing it in more at a 90-degree angle to North King. The benefit here is that it gives all the drivers on different approaches a better visibility anyway of what others are doing. But when you're in that signalized treatment, you're not dealing with those T-bone type accidents. And so then there's the modern roundabout option, which, in this case, the way it's designed, it involves, again, kind of sweeping Hatfield Street up. It involves putting the traffic circle there at the intersection. And when you step through the considerations for this particular site, and we think about sight lines and we think about speed being those key safety issues, a roundabout does address both of those issues. And then the roundabout comparably addresses the operational issues, getting people through this intersection in a reasonable amount of time. And then, similar to the signals, I mean, the operations would be improved by a signal as well, as would accommodation. But really, the modern roundabout rises to the top in the alternatives analysis because of its ability to address those key safety issues. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about those key safety issues. Really, I want to focus on the two circular images on this slide. And if we look at the lower one first, what we're dealing with here is the gray lines represent, well, I should say the lower image first represents a four-leg intersection, kind of a standard intersection, and it could be signalized or stop controlled. But what you have with those gray lines is the possible vehicle paths through the intersection. So, you come up to a stop, right? You can go straight, left, or right. And that's what you're seeing is with those gray lines is all those possible movements. The orange dots on this image, they're plot points that show possible vehicle on vehicle conflict points in that intersection. So when you're dealing with a regular traditional four-leg intersection, you have 32 vehicle to vehicle conflict points plotted within that intersection. On top of that, you have 16 pedestrian conflict points at the crosswalks. So if we look at the upper image now, you can tell this is modeling a roundabout. You've got that inscribed circle in the middle. What's going on in a roundabout is that really your only conflict points are the entry and the exit when people are kind of accelerating or slowing down and disrupting the traffic flow. So when you compare the possible conflict points, you go from 32 conflict points in a four-leg intersection down to 8 in a modern roundabout. And similarly, the pedestrian conflicts drop as well. On top, just on the sheer number of possible points of collision, we've dropped, right? But in addition, now you've got to recognize the angles at which those accidents would occur. In the lower picture, some of those accidents, a good handful of them, are those T-bone, those severe accidents. In the upper image, those accidents are what we would usually refer to as fender benders. You know, we're bumping into somebody's bumper. You know, we're not hitting somebody right in the driver's side door at speed. And if you would go to the next slide, please, Alan. We'll talk about speed for a second. You know, this is a powerful graphic once you dive into it. You see the speed limit signs down the bottom, 20, 30, 40, 50, and you've got these orange bars coming up above them. This slide in particular, this graphic, it really focuses on bicycle and pedestrian safety because they're the unprotected users on the roadway. But the same logic applies to motor vehicle operator safety as well. But what this graphic is saying is that if a motor vehicle at 50 miles an hour strikes a pedestrian, there's a near 100% chance that accident is going to result in a fatality. On the contrary, if that same collision happens at 20 miles an hour, there's only a 5% chance that that accident results in a fatality. So what we know about our project intersection, about North King Street and Hatfield Street, is that we have a speed issue. And we have speeds on North King Street between 40 and 50 miles an hour. So you can see that that pedestrian fatality rate is between 80 and 100%. If you think about a modern roundabout and the speed control that it effectively forces on everybody entering the intersection, you know, we're down to 20 miles an hour or lower. And so you can drastically see the improvement in safety for the unprotected users, the bikes and the peds. You know, we don't have percentages here for motor vehicle to motor vehicle accidents, but the same logic is going to apply. Next slide, please, Alan. So that I want to look at this slide for a minute and talk through it with everybody on the call. This is a figure from that 2017 intersection control evaluation. You know, it's a graph that's titled net present value of total cost. That's a mouthful. What does it mean, right? So what we're doing in the intersection control evaluation is we're projecting out over a 15-year lifespan the cost of each potential intersection treatment. And cost is kind of, you know, a misnomer here, because what we've done with things like safety and operation is we've used industry standard factors to convert those to a dollar amount. You know, if people are stuck at the intersection for so long, it costs, you know, the longer they're stuck there, the more it costs. The more severe accidents we have, the more expensive safety is. And these factors weren't dreamt up by the design team. These are industry standard factors that we use. So if we look now at the graph in particular, if you look to the left, you have two alternatives there with stop control at the existing intersection. You can quickly tell that despite the either no implementation cost, because the one on the left is effectively a do nothing, or even just a minor geometry modification with the second column, the auto passenger delay, which is the red band, the auto passenger delay amounts to a significant cost over the 15 years. And so if we move to the right, you've got a traffic signal and you've got a roundabout. And if we stay focused on that red band, you know, there's auto passenger delay. The roundabout in this case actually does a little bit of a better job managing that delay over the 15 years. But I wouldn't say that this is a deciding factor. It's pretty close here. If we look below that to the gold band, the implementation cost of the roundabout is higher. We know that from general practice. Roundabouts, they cost more up front. They're more impactful to the sites that they're constructed on. But when we look at the cream colored bar, or part of the bar, the safety portion, it becomes evident pretty quickly that the roundabout deals with the safety issues at this project site. And you can see that computed over a 15-year life cycle, where, you know, those accidents come down, the severity of those accidents come down, and therefore the cost associated with them comes down. And I would just point out that if you look at the traffic signal, the cream portion of the bar is pretty comparable to that of the stop control. And, you know, going back to that discussion about the crashes we see at this intersection are those severe angle T-bone style accidents, and that traffic signal does not mitigate for that safety hazard. So I would like to, you know, I tried to focus on two key points here. One being that there was an objective alternative analysis done on the engineering of which design should be preferred. And there was actually two done on this project, because there was the functional design report and preliminary design, and there was the intersection control evaluation after the design public hearing. And the second point is that it's visible on this slide from the cream colored bars. The safety component really drives the roundabout to the preferred alternative at this intersection, because the things that a roundabout mitigates for, the speed and the sight lines, are the issues here. And so that's the end of the design presentation. I hope that sets a little bit of a stage for discussion later. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to talk about some of the archaeology.
Thank you, Alex. My name is Jamie Harwood. Next slide, please. I'm the Masthead archaeologist, and I'm going to talk about the archaeological field investigations. So all archaeological review for this project was conducted under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. And what this act does is requires federal agencies to consider the effects of projects on historic properties. So as this project is supported in part with federal funding, Federal Highway is the lead federal agency. One of the key components of Section 106 is consultation. So throughout the 106 process, consultation was conducted with the Federal Highway Administration, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, the Massachusetts Historical Commission, the Northampton Historical Commission, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officers of the Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead-Aquina, the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe, the Stockbridge-Munsee Community Band of Mohican Indians, and the Narragansett Indian Tribe, and also interested parties such as property owners. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. For the archaeological field investigations, they were conducted by Archaeological and Historical Services, AHS, on behalf of MassDOT, and they were conducted in 3 phases, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So I'm gonna talk briefly about some of these. So the results of the phase 1 and phase 2 field investigations indicated this was an early archaic period site dating to about 9,500 years ago to 8,000 years ago. And it consisted of 2 activity areas identified as Locus 1 and Locus 2. Next slide, please. So what you have here is it's a figure, it's the archaeological field investigations overlaid on a site plan. And you can see where from the right, where 5 and 10 come in and where North Hatfield Street enters. And you can see the plans of the roundabout with the realignment of Hatfield Street. The blue area is the right-of-way taking that was necessary for the project work. The area, the little red strip, is the existing driveway that enters the intersection. And you can see coming off that, there's kind of a, where the driveway is going to be realigned. Also shown on this figure is there's some dashed area that there's a modern kind of borrow pit out there. The yellowish circle is the, it's kind of a eroded, the eroded bedrock out there. So it was not a testable area. And you can see these kind of speckled areas are where there was standing water, wetlands, but also high water table. So what AHS did is they overlaid a testing grid over the entire site. And these, they followed standard archaeological practices, establishing a testing grid over the area to sample the area. And you can see that there are yellow squares, and those are all the yellow squares had no artifacts in it, historic or pre-contact Native American. Some of the blue squares that you can kind of see only had some historic artifacts in it. And those are associated with, the area was plowed in the historic period. And those are related to just kind of trash dumping, very light. And you can kind of see where the arrow, this yellow arrow comes off in that kind of southeast corner is where the site is located. And in this area was the only low density concentration of pre-contact Native American artifacts. So and so what AHS did was, based on this concentration, we did further testing, and they were able to identify two artifact concentrations identified as locus 1 and locus 2. And you can see this kind of box at the top is an insert. And I'll talk more about the insert when I talk more about the data recovery program excavations. But next slide, please.
Sure thing. Jamie, if you could maybe perhaps reposition your mic just to speak a little bit louder, that'd be great. No problem. No problem. Thank you very much.
Okay. And so what two activity areas were associated with were tree throws. And what you can see is this is an example, a photograph of a modern tree throw. And it's pretty straightforward when you have kind of an area like the project area that kind of is a sloped upland, exposed to high winds, slope. You get trees that will fall over, and the root ball system will expose kind of a lot of cobbles and material from the lower levels. And so Native Americans would utilize these for material, cobbles from the lower glacial till. So it was really, why the site was considered unique was that it was not only the material that was being identified, the age, but also that it was a single component site. There was no reuse of the site. There was no later occupations that often tend to blur out early archaic sites. So, and ultimately AHS identified a tree throw at each activity area, which is indicative of why they were there and why they showed up. So next slide, please. So ultimately in AHS's phase 1 and phase 2 report, they provided 3 recommendations to MassDOT. The first is that the site is eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places under Criterion A and Criterion D. So Criterion A, that one was due to the information it could provide on the kind of the larger transition from Paleolithic to early archaic. And Criterion D, which mostly applies to archaeological sites, was the information it could yield to history or prehistory. And in this case, it was the information it could yield through archaeological excavation. The second is avoidance of the National Register eligible site by project activities. And the third recommendation was that if avoidance is neither prudent nor feasible, impact mitigation in the form of a data recovery program to remove portions of the site affected by the project. So ultimately, MassDOT recommended to Federal Highway that the site is National Register eligible and that the project work would have an unavoidable adverse effect on the site based on project design, safety, and cost requirements. Next slide, please. So based on these decisions, MassDOT developed a memorandum of agreement, which is an agreement that stipulates how the adverse effects on the site will be resolved. So MassDOT proposed to mitigate the adverse effect on the archaeological site through a data recovery program. And data recovery program in this case were further excavation to recover the information from the site in order to mitigate the adverse effect. And data recovery programs are common tools used to do this, and they effectively recover the information. So, so MassDOT coordinated a draft MOA and a draft data recovery program with Federal Highway, who then submitted it to the Mass Historical Commission, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and also to the Native American tribes. Only the MHC provided comments on the draft MOA and the data recovery plan. As the MHC was the only one to provide comments, MassDOT, Federal Highway, and the MHC executed an MOA stating that the archaeological site was eligible, the highway project would have an adverse effect on the archaeological site, the adverse effect could not be avoided, and the adverse effect could be mitigated through archaeological excavation under a detailed data recovery plan. Next slide, please. So this is going back, this is the same figure as before. I just wanted to circle back to it. So I want to focus on the insert up at the top. And what this highlights is the type of excavations that were conducted under the data recovery program. You can see there were more block testing to really open a window to expose the 2 tree throw features. Those were excavated. and also to recover more artifacts. The second component of the data recovery program, because this site had a plow zone over it that was sufficiently sampled, there was machine stripping of the plow zone. And what was the reason for that was to try to expose more features. And only one other feature was exposed near Locus 1 and Locus 2, and that was a hearth feature. So there was one hearth feature identified and 2 tree throw activity areas. So it was pretty unique to see this kind of a window into this type of activity here. Next slide, please. So the current status of the site, the data recovery program excavations were conducted between September 23rd and October 28th, 2019. AHS spent a lot of time analyzing the results and writing it up. And so their initial results were presented in a data recovery program fieldwork completion memorandum. And MassDOT submitted that to the Mass Historical Commission on June 23rd, 2020. There was a bit of a delay in it because of COVID-related delays, quarantine, the necessity of quarantine and such. So ultimately, the MHC concurred that the excavation portion of the archaeological data recovery program was adequately completed. So they determined that the site was appropriately mitigated, that sufficient archaeological excavation had occurred in order to recover enough information per the program, data recovery program. Next slide, please. Many questions have come up about the status of the artifacts. All archaeological excavations were conducted under 2 permits issued by the Massachusetts State Archaeologist. As the archaeological investigations were conducted on lands being evaluated by the state, that was why the permits were necessary. And as they were conducted under permits, so all specimens collected are the property of the Commonwealth. They are not the property of AHS. They are not the property of MassDOT. They are considered the property of the Commonwealth. So currently, AHS is curating them on behalf of the Commonwealth for the time being. Next slide, please. So the next steps are Federal Highway, the Mass Historical Commission, and MassDOT will continue to implement the stipulations of the Memorandum of Agreement. The Memorandum of Agreement cannot be negated. The stipulations cannot be negated. They must be implemented. 2 of the stipulations that are upcoming are the HS will produce a draft data recovery report, and that's anticipated next month. And one of these stipulations is also that MassDOT will provide recommendations regarding suitable public interpretation measures for the site information. And what this will do, MassDOT will provide recommendations of how to get the information to the public. This will be presented to Federal Highway, who will then submit them to the consulting parties, which include Native American tribes and others. And some of this can be an appropriate naming of the site, other things such as public displays and such. But ultimately, to conclude, Federal Highway is the lead federal agency, and they are continuing Section 106 consultation with the Native American tribes and other consulting parties. So Section 106 does not end. It is a process, and Federal Highway is continuing to consult with the tribes. Thank you. That's it.
Next slide, Alan. And can you move to the next one as well, actually? So thanks, Jamie, for that detailed presentation, and Alex as well. So this is Brian again, and I'd like to talk about next steps before we go to the Q&A portion. And after tonight's meeting, the project informational website, the public comment portal we opened on January 28th, that'll remain open, as I mentioned earlier, until March 8th. And as that's progressing, and we'll be continually reviewing the comments that are provided there, and that we've either received by email or through the public comment portal. And we'll be assessing them and then making updates and providing additional information as needed on the public informational website or other means as necessary to respond to all the comments we receive after March 8th. And then it's Mass DOT's intent to refile with the MEPA office. Once public outreach is completed, I'd like to note that there will be an additional opportunity to comment on the project through the MEPA process, which will include its own public comment period after the ENF is refiled. And we'll from there, that's it for our presentation. At this time, I think we can start the Q&A session now. And again, I think we're going to give elected officials first preference for making any remarks or asking any questions before we open up the Q&A to everyone else. Alan, do you mind kicking that off, seeing if anybody?
Of course. And thank you for the opportunity, Brian. And thank you all for attending and for filling in the question and answer box. We certainly appreciate that. And as Brian mentioned a moment ago, we're going to get to those momentarily. Just a couple quick reminders. First off, this meeting is being recorded for archival purposes. So if you're not comfortable with your voice coming on to the presentation in a moment, or your comment being read out loud, now's a good time to perhaps exit. Also, for those of you interested, we are using closed captioning. You can press the closed caption button in the bottom row of Zoom commands if that's helpful for you. Right now, there are currently no hands raised, and please do me a favor, keep it that way just for the moment. If there are any elected officials, perhaps the mayor or anyone else would like to speak or offer remarks, as Brian said, we're going to offer that opportunity first. I please invite you, elected officials, to raise your hand so we can call on you. We'll give that just a moment. If anyone would like to exercise that opportunity. Okay, I don't see any at the moment. So with that, we will now progress to general audience questions and answers. So a couple options. Again, please use the Q&A box down below, as several of you already have, to type in a question. And what we'll do is we'll read those out loud in just a moment. And also, if you would like to take yourself off of mute, please use the raised hand feature. It looks like someone is literally giving you a high five, raising your hand. You can do that as well. And what we'll do is I'll send a notification to me. I'll call out your name. We'll let you come off of mute. You've got about 2 minutes or so, plus or minus, and to share your comment or ask your question. And then the project team can respond as appropriate. We do have at the moment one dial-in participant, so thank you for joining us. If you would like to raise your hand, that is *9 on your keypad. That does the same thing. It sends me a command to raise your hand, and then I can also send a command to you to unmute your line if you would like to offer up a question or comment that way. So with that, we will get into it. I do not see any hands raised at the moment, so we're going to go over to the first couple Q&A. We did just see a hand raised, so thanks for that. Let's get to a couple. Let me find my mouse here. Here you go. A couple questions, a couple text-based questions, and then we'll go to our first hand raised in just a moment. So first text-based question from B. Skinner is, why are you going ahead with this project when the community and Native Americans tribes are against continuation of the destructive of this site for a roundabout? So Brian, I'm not sure if you want to field that or direct it to a member of our team.
Yeah, I think I'd like to first kick that to Alex to kind of talk about sort of the design selection process there, and then maybe if Jamie can expound upon sort of the 106 process to date a little bit.
Thanks, Brian. I mean, going back to I know it was a bit of a high level brief discussion of alternatives analysis. From the engineering perspective, the roundabout is the right treatment here. And so, I hope that the safety reasons for that were adequately conveyed during the presentation. The characteristics of the existing intersection, the safety, the crash reports and things that we have on it do indicate the imperative to make an improvement here. But I can allow Jamie to add the additional comment to that as well.
Thanks, Alex. So in under 106, we are in constant coordination with the Native American tribes throughout the entire process. They were informed of all the archaeological survey when they were going to happen. The only tribe that actually came out to monitor The archaeology was the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhetequina. The other tribes, we either did not get a response from, or we did get a response that they just wanted to be kept informed of the results. And so we've kept people informed. Like I talked about, is the archaeological site is not going to be destroyed. It was actually mitigated during the data recovery program. That was the purpose of it, was to recover the archaeological information from that site, which, you know, we coordinated that with Federal Highway, with the Mass Historical Commission. We developed a data recovery program for the excavation that was provided to the tribes. It was provided and none of them responded. So the data recovery program is a common mitigation tool. It is in order to scientifically sample and recover information. So we did follow through with this. The representative of the Wampanoag tribe was out there even during the data recovery program. So there has been coordination with that. So thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Alan,
Okay.
can we move to the next question?
Of course. Next question. We'll do 2 more text-based Q&A, then we'll get to some of the hands raised. I just want to let folks know that I do see the hands raised. We just have, we've got a few more text questions and hand raised at the moment. So just trying to get through all of them. Next text-based question came in from Adele Franks. And Adele asks or comments, why are there no representatives of Native American tribes as part of the presentation? This is a crucial omission in Adele's opinion, since the controversy involves the tribes.
Alan, is that referring to whether they're not part of the presentation? Like, they have a speaking part of the presentation?
I believe so. I read the question from Adele verbatim, so I don't know, but I'm guessing that's I'm guessing that's what Adele refers to. If Adele, if you would like to raise your hand and come off of mute, welcome you to add some additional commentary. So with that, I see your hand raised. So Adele, you should be able to unmute your microphone, and there you go. Welcome.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I was expecting to hear directly from the tribes during this presentation, so I was surprised that they weren't included.
The one thing that I'll add before I allow Jamie Harwood to answer that is that, you know, the tribes aren't a proponent of the project. You know, this is something that is being worked on by Mass DOT, the Federal Highway Administration, and the city of Northampton. So we did not ask the tribes to speak on behalf of the project. But as Jamie mentioned earlier, you know, we have, per the 106 requirements, we have consulted with them throughout multiple phases of the archaeological process as we've gotten the MOA signed, and you know, as we continue to work on the stipulations of that MOA. So Jamie, without stepping on your toes, if you want to add to that as to why we don't have any of the tribes speaking with us tonight.
The main reason is once an eligible site has been identified, Federal Highway, as the lead federal agency, takes over the coordination consultation with the Native American tribes on a government-to-government basis. So out of respect to the government-to-government, Federal Highway handles that, and it's ongoing. So it's kind of the nature, like Brian said, the nature of the meeting was to present the project and what was done, rather than debate a lot of the issues. Federal Highway is currently handling the concerns of the Native American tribes. So those are ongoing, and it is kind of not our place at this point to kind of speak about that because they are ongoing. So Federal Highway and the tribes have an ongoing discussion about their various consultations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. All right. Next up is from Nonham or Nonham. Hopefully I'm saying the name correctly. And Nonham writes, the last traffic circle destroyed another ancient indigenous site. And this is also an ancient indigenous site, a unique one that was recommended for the National Register of Historic Places. So why are all the native sites being destroyed while white historic sites are preserved?
I don't think I'm aware of another roundabout where, you know, I don't know if DOT was involved with it or when it occurred. I don't know, Rich Massey from District 2. Are there any other, you know, roundabouts you can speak towards where they have these same issues? Because I don't happen to be familiar with them. And yeah, forgive me if I'm not sure of that correct roundabout in question. Maybe we could allow the person who asked the question to elaborate on that.
Rich, why you chime in, I'm gonna also ask Nanam or Nanham, if I said that correctly. If you would like to raise your hand and offer additional commentary, you may. You're not required to do so. I do see a hand raised. So, Rich, why don't I let this person speak, and then we can take the comment in full context. So give me one moment.
Sure.
Okay. Nanam, you should now be able to unmute your microphone. There you go.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving me a moment to ask this question. The place that, it's Noham, by the way. No problem. The place that's referred to is just down the road. It was about 8,000 years old. It was described mainly as a summer habitation place, indicated by the food remains that were located on the site. It's just down the road where there was another project. This happened just a year or two ago. There's also, in all of Northampton, there's more than a dozen indigenous sites, and historically, a bunch more of them have already been destroyed before the records were really being kept on this. And the point I'm asking is, after all this serial destruction of indigenous sites, being a local native descendant, and by the way, none of us are recognized. There are no recognized tribes anywhere in Western Massachusetts whatsoever, but there are 17 that have sought recognition. We have no recognition or representation. There are no sites preserved anywhere in Northampton of indigenous people, but there are colonial and other Euro-American sites preserved, including using public funds all over the city and all over the state. And I'm asking, when is the site going to be preserved? And when is there going to be another result other than removal of the artifacts and destruction of the site? There are other sites in the immediate area that have also been erased historically in the immediate area of Nyack, which is where we're talking about. So that's the question.
Okay, so unfortunately, I apologize. I'm not familiar with those projects in question. I'd only be familiar with recent DOT projects or the proponent of. Rich, are you? I'll kick it to you. Are you aware of any of those projects that you might be referring to?
Yes. So the Interchange 19 project, the roundabout near the Coolidge Bridge, when that project was being developed, there were two previously identified sites at the Northampton Boathouse and the Coolidge Bridge. And there was some initial investigation done based on the presence of those sites. According to the CRU record for that, Cultural Resources Unit record, the Stockbury-Muncie Tribal Historic Preservation Officer expressed concerns about that, and further investigation was done. And 3 test units were dug, and based on some finding of some other information from those test pits, a more extensive survey was done and did not find significant artifact deposits or features in any of the areas tested.
Thanks, Rich. And before Jamie, I'll probably give you the opportunity to speak on that, but we really just want to talk about this particular project here. I should mention that we really want to hone in on the issues for this specific project. So Jamie, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, that project was also reviewed under Section 106, and there was coordination with the tribes, and the Stockbridge Munsee did provide comments, which was why then we went ahead and did the survey at their request. And like Rich said, there was no any intact artifact deposits, any layers identified. That area there was previous disturbance. That interchange had been realigned. Historically, there were historic houses there. So we did do survey there. There was no eligible site at that location, and we were able to clear it under 106. So based on coordination, that was also coordination with Federal Highway and the MHC. So.
And Jamie, maybe chime in on the fact that, although that investigation happened and both of those locations were a roundabout, it's not like there's any tie to roundabouts and archaeological impacts. It's something that we see in work that we're doing throughout the state. So there are other projects here in Northampton, but also throughout the state that we're seeing these types of impacts. And so the process is not unique here for just because of the fact that it's a roundabout.
And right, and I can further comment. I mean, as the Masthead archaeologist, we review every single project that comes through our doors for cultural resources. So we review everything, even if it's just roadway pavement markings, if it's just simple things. So we review every single project. So we don't pick and choose. We review every single ones.
Okay.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Nohem, for asking the follow-on question. And I apologize for saying your name incorrectly beforehand. Hopefully that additional commentary helped. All right, we'll do one more text-based question, then we'll flip over to another live question. Let's see, and sorry, another question. This question is from Langa, and Liana asks, can you explain how you aren't breaking the Federal National Historic Protection Act in several ways by destroying a 10,000-year-old site? And can you also explain why you ignored strong opposition from archaeologists who determined that this site is worth saving, as well as the Aquinnah, Wampanoag, and Narragansett tribes, and plenty of other concerned Massachusetts citizens like myself? So another archaeology question, perhaps for Jameson.
Yeah.
Brian.
Yeah, the one thing that I'll mention before I kick it to Jamie is that, and we mentioned the word destruction of a site. And, I think that, a important message to get across here is that, we are going through steps to mitigate our impacts through the data recovery program is one of the biggest pieces of that. And that can result in, and other benefits. But Jamie, I'll kick it to you so that you can speak towards that.
Thank you, Brian. We are in compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act because the site was mitigated. The adverse effect on the eligible site was acknowledged. It was determined to be unavoidable. It was coordinated with the appropriate people of Federal Highway, the Mass Historical Commission, the tribes. Like I said before, the Mass Historical Commission was the only one who provided comments on the MOA and data recovery plan. So we did not destroy the site. It was actually the data recovery program conducted additional excavations to recover the material and information. It actually mitigated the adverse effect as determined and accepted by Federal Highway and Mass Historical Commission. And the opposition really only came about afterwards because there was, like I said before, a tribal monitor throughout the excavations. The Narragansett tribe never responded to any of our notices. They were notified throughout the process. From the beginning of the surveys to the very end, they never responded. The Aquinnah Wampanoag did provide a monitor and comments So we are in fact in compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act, and the site wasn't, I guess it's somebody's definition of whether they feel it was destroyed, but the information was scientifically recovered from the site. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll now turn to hand raiser 2 to go back and forth a bit here. Next hand raised I see in order here is Greg Skibisky. Greg, I'm going to send a command for you to take yourself off of mute, and when you do, the floor is yours for about 2 minutes or so.
Thank you very much. My name is Greg Skibisky. My father is John Skibisky. He's the former landowner of the property in question that has the site on it. My father is also former trustee of Historic Northampton and a lifelong historian. We have been granted, through great trial, consulting party status by the Federal Highway Administration, which means that we get to see all of these internal documents, site reports, things like this. As many of you know, I've received permission from the Attorney General to share that information publicly. So we're in a position here where much of the public has seen the actual site reports from AHS that did the actual work. At the same time, we have here Mass DOT, and I respectfully have to say, Jamie, your interpretation of the actual archaeological site reports is false. There is no agreement between the actual site reports, except for some facts that don't matter, and what you're telling the public. And if I hadn't released this information through the Attorney General, the public would be none the wiser and would have to trust Mass DOT for its interpretation of Native American significance, right? Mass DOT is the one doing the destruction, and we're trusting Mass DOT to tell us what's there. That makes no sense at all, okay? So I'm against that, and there's a fundamental problem with the system. Second of all, the Native Americans are being omitted from this process. I spoke yesterday, to Mark Andrews of the Wampanoag, and you guys say that you're consulting, okay? You guys say that he was part of they didn't sign the MOA, okay? But he was on site actually observing what was going on. But when you guys signed the MOA, the Wampanoag were not even notified or asked to sign it, okay? This is what they say. I'm sorry. So what I have to ask is, as my question, since you can't confront those things as they're facts, what I want to know is what alternatives were looked at after the site was discovered, the Native American site, right? I know you looked at alternatives before, but what alternatives were looked at afterwards that would take into account the impact on the Native American site? Because in the MEPA filing, there was no looking at anything having to do with the Native American site in the alternative analysis. So that would be my question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Skibisky. First, we'll break down your question into several parts. So you did talk about alternatives that were analyzed with the in respect to the archaeological impacts. So Alex, I'll leave it to you to sort of talk about the alternatives. So you have the floor there.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I mean, in fairness to Mr. Skibisky's point, the alternatives on the timeline are prior to this really incurring in earnest. I think that in some of the discussions that we've had with the team, the alternatives that were reviewed for this site and the site constraints out here, were presented to, Jamie would have to correct me on the, how the process works, but in the Section 106 process, they effectively determined that this was an unavoidable take, and that was based on the analysis that had been done before, and then the design that had been presented and the other existing site constraints. So, from a timeline perspective, Mr. Skibisky is correct. There was not an additional alternative introduced after that point, but those alternatives and the design constraints on this site, factored into that discussion in the Section 106 process.
And Jamie, could you chime in on the process and how that is handled, not just here, but typically?
Yeah, Alan, can you pull up slide 21, please?
Yes.
Thank you. I would respectfully disagree with a lot of Mr. Skibisky's statements. The tribes were notified throughout the process. The letters are sent to the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, who is the tribal representative. So it is, unfortunately, it is up to them to respond. But everything we coordinate goes through Federal Highway. So currently, like I said before, the discussion of ongoing consultation is between Federal Highway and the tribes based on the government to government relation. Actually, I'm sorry, it's, can you go back a couple? Let me keep going back on the slides. One more. So this is, the key point is that everybody wants to cite only a portion of AHS's work. And in this case, everybody is citing their phase 1 and phase 2 report. They're not citing the information that happened after the report, the determinations of eligibility, the coordination with Federal Highway, and they're not citing the data recovery program and fieldwork completion memo. They're only citing part of it. So in this case, yes, AHS did recommend the site is eligible. We concurred with that. They recommended to either avoid the site, or if avoidance was not possible or was not considered prudent or feasible, impact mitigation in the form of a data recovery program. So AHS made several recommendations, and that is, and these 3 recommendations are directly from the phase 1 and phase 2 report, not just the first 2, but also the 3rd. So MassDOT then recommended to Federal Highway that the site is eligible and the adverse effect is unavoidable based on design, safety, costs. So Federal Highway concurred with our recommendation. We developed an MOA, a draft MOA, which went to the Mass Historical Commission and the tribes. The tribes did not comment on it. Federal Highway forwarded this information to them. So I have all this documentation that it's there. Yes, AHS had a phase 1 and phase 2 report where they made recommendations, but there were many things that happened after that that the tribes were a part of, and it was an ongoing discussion. So, and there was even a tribal representative during the data recovery program excavations that happened. So there was a lot in the statement in question, so I can try to answer anything. I don't know if there's more to it, but I'll leave that for now. Thanks.
Yeah, was there anything that we didn't address there?
I'm sorry, Mr. Skibisky's microphone is off. Do you want me to re-enable it?
I think just if he raises his hand again, Alan, we can have follow-up questions after we get through the first people asking questions. Okay.
All right, next text-based question I see, let's see, from Noam again, but a different topic. Noam offers up, we heard that there were already accidents at the other new traffic circle. How can you prove that this will significantly improve safety? Why not just use traffic lights? Why does Northampton, quote unquote, prefer roundabouts? Does this really solve the growing traffic problem? Because how will this carry the growing traffic in coming years? And don't we need another bridge to carry our growing traffic? There's a couple questions thematically related to that. So we'll see if we can capture most of that here. So Brian, I'll leave it to you to share among the team.
Yeah, so I think the first part, sort of the questions about roundabouts in general and their design, I'll leave that to Andy to answer. And then after Andy's complete, I think that there's another portion in there specific to the project itself. So I'll let Alex answer it.
Alan, do you mind reading just the question about the roundabout again? Sorry, there was.
Yep. So I'll summarize. They've heard that there were already accidents at the other traffic circle. How can we prove that this one will significantly improve safety? Why not just use lights? And why does Northampton prefer roundabouts?
Sure. And Wayne from the City of Northampton is on the call as well. So Wayne, feel free to chime in about locally specific your preference. But MassDOT recently released a roundabout design guide. It's a very good tool that we're using for implementing safety countermeasures throughout the state. Specifically about crashes at roundabouts. Yes, there are crashes that do happen at roundabouts, but what Alex presented earlier was what type of crashes can occur. Alan, if you could go back to the graphic that has the 2 circles on it. Alex explained the different, this one here, the differences in the number of conflict points, the dots located on this image. There are 8 vehicle-to-vehicle conflict points, 8 pedestrian-to-vehicle conflict points, as opposed to at a more standard 4-way intersection, signalized or unsignalized. What is critical here to understand is kinetic energy. You've got a vehicle in motion that weighs a certain amount and is going at a certain speed. At roundabouts, you have geometry. It's designed such that the vehicles will slow down so that when a crash does occur, it's occurring at a slower speed. Alex correctly pointed out that when those crashes are occurring at a slower speed, there is a significant reduction in the likelihood of a fatality for a pedestrian when hit by a vehicle at that slower speed. And that's what we're trying to capture, not just here in Northampton, but throughout the state. That benefit is also transferred to vehicle-to-vehicle crashes. They're much less likely to end up in a fatal crash or a severe injury crash. And that's something that we're seeing at roundabouts throughout Massachusetts, is improvements from a safety perspective with a goal of reducing the number of fatalities that happen on Massachusetts roadways. And Alex, I don't know if you want to add anything specific.
No, I think that covers it, Andy. And you know, it's really a matter here of trying to treat the symptoms that we see when we look at the existing intersection, and those are the higher speeds leading to those more severe collisions. So as Andy was saying, it's not necessarily the quantity that you're going for. It's the severity of those intersections. If your collisions become property damage only, fender benders, and people are not dying or having life-altering injuries as a result of those collisions, then we've done our job as engineers from a safety perspective. And so we're really looking at crash severity. Yes, there tends to be fender benders in these roundabouts, especially right after construction.
And the first major study done on the benefits of roundabouts compared to signalized intersections in the US was done about 20 years ago by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. And they found very consistent trends in reduction of fatal crashes at intersections that we're seeing today. So over the past 2 decades, that lives saved, it says up to 90% reduction in fatal crashes is still true today as it was 20 years ago.
And if I might add to Massachusetts, in Massachusetts, we have our own figures that we've done. We've compared intersections we looked at crashes before a roundabout was constructed, and we looked at crashes after a roundabout was constructed. And for example, for traffic signals, if we convert a traffic signal to a roundabout, fatal and injury crashes in Massachusetts were reduced by 78% by converting a traffic signal to a roundabout. So, and that supports the national statistics as well.
This is Wayne.
Thanks, everyone.
This is Wayne from the city. Let me also add, from the city's perspective, basically what you've heard is exactly our feeling. We've had 3 major community-involved transportation plans in the last 15 years. And each one, we've had very strong community support for roundabouts for all the reasons you've just heard. We're big believers in the Vision Zero concept of, no fatalities should be accepted, and roundabouts get us closer to that than signals.
Great. There was a follow-on to that question, also just asking from a design alternative perspective why an overpass was not considered, or including a pedestrian overpass as well. I'm not sure if you want to answer that now or maybe in conjunction with another traffic question.
Alan, could you repeat that question?
Sure. The question was, why not? The question was, why not consider an overpass, including a pedestrian overpass, as one of the design alternatives?
Okay. Andy, you have your
I'm happy
camera
to chime
on.
in. Sure. We do use pedestrian overpasses, but they're typically used at grade separated interchanges or limited access highways. So in this case, I-91 would be the closest example to that. In say downtown Boston, it might be Estero Drive or the Mass Pike, where you would have a pedestrian overpass. The reason why we're not using it in an application like this is it can actually lead to higher speed activity on the roadway. To have pedestrians in the built environment around where the vehicle's driving actually helps to slow down traffic and create more of a place where people want to come to and not drive through at a high speed. In this case, an intersection like this, we wouldn't typically use grade separation based off of the type of facility, the type of roadway that we're using.
Thank you for that. Let's see, do two more text questions, then we'll flip over to hand raises. So another traffic related question was from Adele Franks earlier. Why do signalized intersections not stop T-bone crashes?
Andy, I'll let you handle that again.
I'll chime in, and then Corey, if you want to add anything. Signalized intersections, while a very effective tool at controlling intersection operations, oftentimes can also be violated. Someone can run a red light. You can't run a roundabout. So a crash can occur due to driver error at a signalized intersection. By building a roundabout, by forcing the driver through the geometry that we're using at the intersection to slow down and yield to circulating traffic, we're helping to control the speed at which a vehicle can navigate the intersection. That's not to say there isn't a place for using signals. We're using signals at a lot of locations throughout Massachusetts. Corey and I are working on signalized intersection projects in other locations as well. But in the case where we can use a roundabout, we're using it as a life-saving safety countermeasure. I don't know if Corey, you want to add anything?
I think you hit the nail on the head. Quite simply, you cannot run a red light at a roundabout, and you can't run a red light at a traffic signal.
Okay, I'll flip over to a hand raise at the moment. So Gia Neswald, I'm going to send a command to you to unmute your microphone. And when you do, the floor is yours for a question or a comment sticking around about a 2-minute allotment, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the hearing. I have a comment followed by a question.
Great.
My comment is, I'm sure that you all really believe in the benefits of the safety benefits that you're working toward. However, I respectfully ask you to change your language to be more honest. I want to specifically note that it is offensive and untrue to say that there are necessary takes here. I'm sure you're in compliance. Actually, I'm not sure, but you may, I can't speak to whether or not you're in compliance, but I can say that it's clear that you have an alternative that you've decided, is not worth it. It's not an unavoidable take if you have an alternative to building a roundabout on the ground level. I've just forgotten the other language piece, but that built into your language is an assumption that the value of development on this land and the safety improvements is greater than the value of the historic the archaeological objects there. And my question is, how many fatalities have occurred at this particular site? You're giving hypothetical, or you're giving statistics that are based on studies generally, but how about this site? If you're going to do a cost benefit analysis, I'd like to see what the actual benefits are here.
Okay, thank you for that. I will start off by saying that we are trying to display just the facts. So any inflections in language, we apologize for that if it comes off as insensitive. But again, we are doing our best just to talk about the facts and what we have done, and be as transparent as possible here. I apologize if you feel that way, but in terms of your question, I believe you essentially asked if there has been any fatalities at this intersection, and sort of you remarked that you believe that there are other alternatives that meet the purpose and need of the project. So I think Alex is a little bit project specific, so I'll let you take the first shot at it. And then if anybody else wants to chime in, we can go from there.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, Gia. I do want to say first off, as professional engineers, we have a duty to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the general public. And so, our perspective as engineers is always safety focused. And I can appreciate your perspective of looking at the archaeology and the significance there. And, I don't want to, I'm not meaning to be glib, but to a point, it becomes there's other processes here in play that deal with that part of the issue. And I'm not saying that to discount your valid concern. In terms of this particular intersection, it was looked at a couple times. It was looked at in the FDR. It was looked at in the intersection control study. The intersection control study looked at a 5-year period and found 3 injuries and 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 property damage onlys. I can't recall if one of those injuries was a fatality offhand, and that's one 5-year window. I apologize. I wish I knew that offhand. We do have accidents we know of where errant vehicles have ended up in adjacent private properties and have nearly missed having bystanders effectively severely injured or killed by those accidents. So that there's been a lot of near misses at this location as well. I'm sorry, I'm blank. I thought there was another piece I wanted to respond to.
Yeah, Alex, it was looking at the merit of other alternatives against the merit of the roundabout itself.
Yeah, no, thank you. I would say 2 things on the alternatives, and I did see another comment that we may address individually later. But people talk about why can't it shift, right? I mean, so in one sense, there's an alternative, a traffic signal. From the engineering perspective, I would say the things that I've been saying this evening, which are the signal does not mitigate the safety concern here. And from an engineering perspective, I put that safety of people using this intersection above, that's my highest criteria. And again, not to say that your perspective isn't valid of it. And I don't want it to be misconstrued that way. The second piece of it is, okay, are there other alternatives? People are asking, can it shift to the east? Things like that. Based on the proximity of 91 and the line of no access to the interstate highway system, and based on the grades coming off the side of the road in that direction, which are a little bit steeper, I think, than you usually think they are, that was never really. I'm not saying it wasn't a considered alternative. I'm saying it never made it that far because it just didn't seem like a practical alternative to go in that direction. And there's a lot of private property there. There's a lot of grade to contend with, and then ultimately the interstate, which you can't cross a certain line. I don't quite know where I know where the layout line is. I don't know dimensionally how far it is from where we are, but it's not really enough room to make the improvement in that direction. And And what would happen is your approaches would end up allowing for cars to zip through the roundabout a lot faster. So I hope that's Alex. A little bit of perspective on the engineering approach here. And, you know, if anybody else wants to chime in, that'd be fine.
I think we can move to the next question.
Okay. So let's see. Looks like Mark Andrews, I think, had a related follow-up comment for that. So Mark, I'm going to send a command to you to your device to unmute your microphone. And with that, you can add some commentary, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I guess, pardon me for me not attending earlier. I got this information very late in the game, so I don't know what I've missed, but I did look over the engineering, and I had, well, first off, I have, is Jamie on the line?
Yes.
Jamie Howard?
Yes.
He is.
Okay, well, I mean, I was there during the survey work that was performed by AHS. And I mean, there are stone tools, there are scrapers, there's multiple hearth features, there's evidence of long-term occupation there. So I'm curious as to, you know, your characterization of and interpretation of the findings. You know, to me, it says long-term occupation very clearly. But before we maybe discuss that, I also want to add that when I was looking over the design, I saw that the, I guess it's called the T configuration versus the Y, where the proposed road goes upslope into Mr. Skibisky's property. That leaves, if you look at the both the existing road and the proposed road, there's a gap that is precisely on the side of the road near the stone wall where the artifacts, the bulk of the artifacts were found. And I've always been trying to understand why we just can't save that parcel. Now, I know there's an elevation issue as to the road's elevation is much lower than the current elevation that, you know, the parcel sits on. But, you know, that's an issue of sloping. And if the slope is too extreme, why don't we just put in a retaining wall there?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Andrews. I think you had a kind of two-part question. First, you asked about, you had questions on the AHS report. And so I'll let Jamie handle that, and then we'll allow Alex to speak about your comments regarding the T intersection versus the roundabout.
Excellent, thank you.
Jamie?
Based on AHS's first report and the data recovery field completion memo, they did not give any discussion of a long-term. They only noted the 2 tree throws and one hearth. It's still an eligible site. It's still a unique site. That's why we dealt with it the way it is, but it was based on their discussion. And, you know, that's, you know, we can either agree to disagree or pull out the report, but it's their discussion. It is a single component site that had a short occupancy. So I can only go by what their reports say and my reading, the reading of them. So.
Mr. Andrews, are you still on the call?
I am.
Okay. Well, go ahead. It sounded like you were going to say something.
Well, yeah, because the completion report I have, but I just don't have it with me at an arm's length here to review it. But I will be doing that as soon as we hang up, because I thought I read vastly different information on their completion report. Plus, you know, I was there for most of the survey. So, you know, as far as the, you know, bifaces, the scrapers, stone knife, you know, you're talking about, you know, a temporary hunting camp wouldn't have such tools left there to be discovered. That would have to be, you know, a long-term occupation where these things were either discarded or lost in this area. But there's a wide range, not to mention all the projectile points in all different, you know, conditions of, you know, whether they're intact or broken, or somebody was, you know, repairing arrows and stuff like that. So I just have to review it again, because what I took away from it was a much different, you know, my characterization of it differs from what Jamie has to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andrews.
Mr. Andrews, he also had a question about a retaining wall. I don't know if Alan, you could go to the graphic of the intersection, the proposed intersection.
I'm not sure which one you mean.
You can actually go to the one that shows the roundabout.
This one?
This one. Yep. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Either that or the T configuration, but the roundabout shows the same, it's the same proposed road.
Yes. So it would, with the way the roadway is aligned, a retaining wall wouldn't. I
don't have the, okay, here it's here down at this bottom screen here. Let me pull it up. There, right there, that one. Well, a lot of it's shaded, so we can't really see. Let me blow this up a little bit.
Jamie, I don't know if you could chime in. Like it seems like the locations where the investigation occurred were in the kind of the center line of the roadway.
Correct. The site, see from the box, and then it kind of, the arrow comes from it to show the insert, but the box shows that the site, the locus 1 and locus 2 were identified, what would be in the middle of the roadway realignment for Hatfield Street.
So in that case, Mr. Andrews, a retaining wall wouldn't avoid that impact.
Well, see, now what I'm seeing is where it's sort of the, you've got some sort of design there that creeps up into the center line of it. If that was removed, we could see where the existing road and the proposed road leaves like a C-shaped parcel of land. The bulk of the finds were right along the stone wall at the edge of the existing road. And as far as showing that graphic that carries the find spots well into the center line of the proposed road, I've had an issue with that since day one.
And I think in this case, the alignment of the intersection, and Alex, I don't know if it would need to be addressed with both the signalized intersection and the roundabout. Is that correct? A T or a roundabout has to do that kind of jog away from the existing alignment.
So the jog was introduced to, you know, start to correct those sight distance issues we talked about earlier, and really for truck movements and turning movements onto North King Street. And you know, Mr. Andrews is correct that once you introduce that, whether it's the T concept or the roundabout, the road's generally in that same location in relation to this slide at this point.
I wish that was those images were removed from where these, I mean, because now also what is on the eastern side of the rotary does that also constitute more fines? Because there was some isolated fines maybe on the other side of that proposed rotary. If we're talking about that pink line being the driveway on the Skibisky property.
Jamie, he's referring to,
I wish we could show an image with the image I have that was on the public accessible map didn't have these two spots in the way.
Jamie, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, there were, even if there were no evidence of an archaeological site the way there was on where the other site was identified. The vast majority of the area on the, what is that, the north side of the current driveway was surveyed, and it was all, the majority of it, I believe, was negative, if not all of it.
Yeah, I was trying to bet what's on the right-hand side of the proposed, what the image is showing as the proposed rotary on the graphic I'm looking at now. It's that pink, the pink road that looks like it could be Mr. Skibisky's existing driveway. So what's right at about 2 o'clock on the rotary is another, what looks like it's the same sort of graphic that depicts the fine spot that I know where that one is.
Jamie, do you have the location that he's describing?
Based on this is the image. I mean, there are yellow shovel test pits out there, so there are none that are appearing pink. The pink line is the driveway there, and so I know everything that was north of that was either negative. There were a lot of disturbed areas over there from there was a historic borrow pit. There's some where the like I said before, the bedrock ledge is exposed and it's eroding down. That was looked at. It's granite, which was not really usable material to make tools. But as far as, I'm not really sure looking at what is being referred to on this. I can try to look up some other images if but otherwise I don't see any other pink dot. All the red dots were associated with the site.
Well, I'm just talking about how the view of the existing road versus the proposed road is obscured by those white blobs with little black specks in them. What is that? And by the way, just so everybody knows, for everybody else's purposes, I'm a cultural resource monitor with the Wampanoag tribe, and I was there during survey. And so I mean, I'm very familiar with this site, and I learned about this not through anybody at DOT or Federal Highways, but from a concerned citizen who alerted me to this meeting. So that's why I joined in at such a late juncture. And I don't know when this started, but I know when I joined it, it obviously was underway, but I was not ever told about this.
Mr. Andrews, this is Brian. I apologize for the late notice. We did our best to sort of advertise the public informational meeting to as many people as possible. And I think there were comments about Mr. Andrews getting some extra time. I think that his input is critical for this project and this discussion. So we wanted to sort of give Mr. Andrews the floor to air his concerns, as we also figured that based on the other questions we saw, people were expecting to hear from a member of the tribes, and also, just this, we figured this was extremely important. So,
Brian, can you answer his question about how on the graphic though there are those black and white specks, kind of obscuring some of the image?
Yeah, unfortunately, I
can answer that. Yeah,
okay,
that's where there's seasonal wetlands, and those areas were not testable. Either they had standing water or they had a very high water table, so they were not considered to be testable.
Well, I mean, that blob actually goes into one of the most significant find spots that are on there, because you've got the existing road, if people can make it out, and the proposed road that is, the bulk of it is in blue, but the bottom left-hand pointed side of that blob is where the hearth features were, and where, that area right at this point is going to be left intact based upon these drawings.
Jamie, do you recognize the location that he's talking about?
I do. The archaeological site was well defined by negative shovel tests. The data recovery plan focused on the site, i.e. the locus 1 and locus 2 activity areas. The area was also had the plow zone with machines stripped around it to locate. So the actual speckled area is is not as close. It's probably about if you go, it's probably about 20 feet away or more. So you're talking about a wetland area that is probably related to a spring, which is also would have been attractive, which is also why the AHS does note, the spring in the area. So you also have the two tree throw areas. So AHS did well define the site.
So, Mr. Andrews, it seems like the locations where the finds were to the left of that speckled area. And then
yeah, I mean, there's if you see the gap between the existing road and the proposed road, and it's flat along the bottom, and it has an arcing arched shape, and it's obscured by that big blob of speckled area, which I guess is the wetland. But I just want to make mention of the machine scraping that happened. I mean, it sounded good on paper, but it didn't really materialize as something as productive as we had hoped for, only because of all the trees that were there. It was a small machine, yet the bucket on the machine really couldn't get around the multitude of tree trunks that were there. So although we hoped for the best, it really didn't yield everything we had expected it to do. So, at what I'm, it just seems at this point that, I'm glad I've got this moment to actually say something, because, excuse me, sort of lost my train of thought, but, I was hoping that, we could discuss, the possibility of that small parcel. The problem is that, and I'm going to pose this to Jamie because, he's an archaeologist by trade. And I think that it's been established that archaeology will render at best a 15% sample of what is potentially underfoot. Would you agree with me on that, Jamie?
Well, all archaeology is a sample. And in this case, though, the data recovery program, because of the small size of each locus, actually we're able to get nearly 100% around each locus. The machine stripping did allow for a larger area to be looked at. But if you look at, a lot of times with sites, you're lucky to get maybe a 5% sample. But in this case, they're able to get about a 30% sample, I think a little less than 30%. But each locus was very thoroughly excavated as part of the data recovery program. And so these were, it was AHS did, I feel like they did a really good job out there, not only identifying these tree throw features, which are very ephemeral, they're very difficult to identify, and they did a great job of identifying, because it's a very unique type of site with these types of features. They're very challenging to identify, and so they did a great job. But it is a small, low density, single component site per their report.
And we just want to be respectful of everyone else's time too, Mark. I think we can continue to engage you throughout this process. We'll have, as Brian mentioned earlier, up until March 8th, we'll be open to comments. So certainly the comments don't have to be one way. There could be a dialogue back and forth, both through the project website and the project team.
Well, I'd like to just close out with this, because I don't want to monopolize the floor, and I understand that. But, you know, we have previous disturbance that we're not sure in what direction, you know, these loci track out, whether it be north, you know, some of this, one of the part of the locus or loci could be under the existing road. We just don't know that. Section 106 was enacted, you know, where it actually had our participation in it in 1988. So anything that was constructed prior to 1988 didn't have these considerations. So it's anybody's guess what could be underfoot at the road or wherever. So, you know, these are certain things that are still unanswered questions. And I'm not willing to buy off on the fact that those two loci is all that is potentially there underfoot.
Well, thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Get to another couple text-based questions and then back to some hand raises. Two questions, I'll combine them together because they're from the same person and they're related. From Jose Lugo. Jose asks, so the design alternative is to continue with the current design plan, and then why can't considerations include using eminent domain to take the property and use it for the redesign?
So I think I'll kick that to Alex to talk about some of that.
Yep, thanks, Brian. Thanks for the comment, Jose. You know, when I ran through the alternatives analysis up front, you know, I admittedly was a little bit high level. We wanted to get through some of the content to set the stage for a productive Q&A. You know, I mean, Mr. Skibisky raised the point before, and I have to acknowledge it, that these alternatives were developed beforehand, you know, but those alternatives were then vetted through the Section 106 process. You know, so we looked at those different, you know, the signals and the roundabout we talked about briefly in the presentation. And then those, you know, those alternatives continued through the process once this additional area was identified. You know, again, with the area, why can't considerations include using eminent domain to take the property and use it for the redesign? You know, I just go back to this intersection is fairly constrained in terms of grades, and there is private property along the east side of this intersection, but it is pretty quickly constrained by the line of no access down to the interstate highway. You know, and so there are issues here with grades and with that line of no access that really start to constrain and limit what you can do with the footprint of an intersection improvement.
Thanks, Alex.
Okay, next, do one more text question, then we'll flip over to a hand raise. Question is from Leah Wing, and says a couple of components to it. While the rituals of EAS and EIR include public participation, they clearly and routinely do not effectively facilitate dispute prevention and public involvement prior to being almost too late, in quotes, which exacerbates the public conflict. So given that planning began in 2009 and major concerns were not raised until 2020, what might be learned by MassDOT about getting more robust and complete public participation at the beginning of a project?
So I think that's in regards to MIPA and NEPA documentation. There was mention to an EIS and EIR. Neither of those were necessary for this project, where we were able to categorically exclude this project under NEPA, where we did provide documentation on Federal Highway, ultimately signed off on that document, I believe in August of 2019, thus concluding NEPA at that time. And then as far as NEPA goes, you know, we did go through part of an ENF process there. But, you know, I think the comment is really in regards to like the public process that was done. And, you know, the city is the main proponent of this project. And I think they had done, prior to requesting federal funds from MassDOT, they had conducted their own public process throughout before going to MassDOT. And then we conducted a design public hearing, we being MassDOT, after the preliminary design was developed. So there were mechanisms for, public comment, and, all the concerns from the public really didn't arise until, after NEPA documentation was complete and the Section 106 process, the MOA, was signed, which doesn't mean the 106 process is complete, as Jamie mentioned, but it means that it's conducted to a sufficient enough point that we can proceed with, advertising the project for construction. In terms of dispute resolution, I really can't comment on that because, like I said, there was no apparent, concern or opposition towards the project by the time it was advertised. Again, due to us remaining in compliance with the state and federal regulations.
Great, thank you for that.
And Alan, as we are creeping up on 8 o'clock, I think we'll extend until 9 o'clock to allow for the number of questions that we're getting, both through the chat as well as the number of hands that are raised. Any questions that we're not able to address by that time, we'll still be able to respond to in writing through our contact information that we receive through you all. But we can also take questions both through our website, which was up earlier, and via email. We'll get all that information out to the panelists. I don't know, Brian, if we had that as like a landing slide at the end of the page. If people are going to take off starting at 8 o'clock, just leave that contact information up there.
Okay. Yeah, I think we do have a few links provided.
Okay. Sorry, I was getting a note from my captioner about getting some additional support. So I've got 4 of the hour. So I want to focus on a couple hand raises because I just want to follow on, Andrew, with what you're saying. For those in the audience, any questions submitted into the text-based Q&A will very much be captured and shared with the project team. I just want to give everyone the assurance that it's not as if your question is not going to go unnoticed. We can certainly capture it. Through the constraints of time, we may not get to them, as Andrew just mentioned a moment ago, but we will capture them absolutely, positively, for sure. So with that, I'm going to go to a text-based question, and then the team can decide if we're going to take a 4-minute or 5-minute leg stretch break, water break, or whatnot. But let me pivot to the next hand raised I see in the queue, and that's Kenneth Leslie Hall. So Kenneth Leslie Hall, you should have an option to unmute your mic. And when you do that, the floor is yours for about 2 minutes.
Hello, Lee Hall here. I have a couple of, excuse me. I have a couple of questions regarding your schematics or whatever. One of them, or all of them, mention future traffic volumes coming down Route 5. And it says that this will be due to increased building, whatever. There's nothing up there. Above there is like, there's 2 miles maybe, if that. And you come to the state police barracks and then you're in Hatfield. So I don't know where all this increased volume is going to be coming down Route 5. That's the first part. And on another one of your schematics or blueprints, whatever, it shows through movement from the eastern side of Route 5. What exactly is that? What does that exactly entail? There's no street there. It's a parking lot or some sales place. There's going to be very little, if any, through traffic coming into that intersection from the east. Could you answer those questions, please?
Happy to take those, Mr. Hall. Sorry, Brian, jumping right in.
No, thanks, Alex.
If you look at the way that some of these traffic studies are done, and specifically the traffic study here, it's reasonable to project out over the design period that you're going to see population growth in this part of the state. And so with that population growth comes an increased traffic. So I think to your point, I don't believe there was sometimes when you do these, you have a plan development, right? You got a mall going in somewhere, you got a Walmart somewhere, you can say, okay, we're gonna have so many trips coming from that. That's not the case here. This is a latent background traffic growth due to population growth. And that's why you see increasing traffic as you go forward in time. So that's kind of that piece of it. The other side of it, just from a schematic perspective, looking at the traffic study, the east entrance is in fact the transmission shop driveway. I doubt it had much volume attributed to it, but it has to be acknowledged in that type of a study because it is in fact part of the intersection at the end of the day. And we're at the roundabout right now. That's the proposed alternative. It is served directly off the roundabout. In a signalized concept, it would actually have its own signal facing it because that driveway is directly in the middle of the intersection. So it has to be dealt with. So you're correct. There's not much traffic coming from that direction, but it has to be acknowledged and managed.
Mm. Okay. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right. Let me move to the next. Next question is hand raised, is from Eric Roos. Eric, hopefully I'm saying your last name correctly. If you would like to take yourself off mute and share your comment or question for about the next 2 minutes.
Thanks so much. I have a request and a note and a question. The request can be summarized as please listen to Mark Andrews, but to elaborate a little more, I'd like to really encourage you to accommodate Native American concerns, even if they're expressed in a way which doesn't conform to the standard process, even if it derails or entirely stops the standard process, because it seems like our government lays down this process, and if the tribes don't conform exactly and precisely to all of these handed down decrees about when and how they can speak up, like they get no voice at all, and that's not okay. The tribes may have limitations of time or personnel that don't let them jump through all these hoops. Like the archaeology report mentions that the Mashpee had concerns, but they weren't able to send a monitor due to staff issues. And then when the monitor was able to make it and did raise concerns, a later portion of the process buried those concerns underneath the label of the impact is unavoidable without actually apparently investigating any alternatives. So even though the feds are doing coordination, if the tribes reach out to you, please listen, or even better, reach out to them, because it honestly sounds like you're not doing an adequate job of that. Secondly, the note is that it seems like there's a lot of hiding behind this process and industry standards. Not so long ago in our history, industry standards were extermination and genocide. Just because something is standard does not make it right. So that very pretty bar chart of relative costs, I didn't see any line item on there, any part of the bar chart, which was a cost for cultural destruction. And that makes it, just as inaccurate as if you'd left off the value of public safety. I realize, yes, there was some recovery, but it sounds like you did not do like a full excavation of literally everything there. You don't know what you might have missed. Archaeology is not, you didn't drill literally everywhere. Finally, a question. You mentioned like notification of Native American tribes. You say, for example, you notified the Narragansett. Did you actually visit them? Like you might check in with a neighbor, or you might pay a consultant seeking their opinion with genuine concern? Or did you just like send off a letter like a landlord fulfilling the bare requirements of the law so you can like, get along with the eviction process type of thing? How much outreach are you actually trying to do to the Native American tribes rather than fulfilling just the bare minimum requirements?
Thank you. So Jamie, I'll let you handle the questions that were asked at the end there about how much, what effort we went through to make sure we consulted with the tribes.
Specifically with the Narragansett, all tribes were sent both a letter informing them of each phase of the survey, but also an email. They're informed by email of exactly when the dates of the survey, and they get an email and often a phone call, because if the dates can often change due to weather. So the Narragansett, they were sent information to both their deputy THPO and their THPO. So both John Brown and also Doug Harris, the deputy THPO. So they were sent out letters doubly. They were sent out emails doubly. And I would have to check if they had phone calls. Often there are phone calls. And the Narragansetts were the only tribe that did not provide any response throughout the process. The Mashpee Wampanoags did respond. David Whedon did respond that he would like to, he couldn't send anybody out, but he wanted to be informed of it. As you heard Mark Andrews was out there for the Wampanoag tribe of Gay Head, Aquina, but also Bonnie Hartley, and then the person who took over for her, Nathan Allenson. They both provided comments that they were interested in the results. And they've been, Nathan Allison has expressed more interest in the results and being sent information now. So they are all, have been notified. The Narragansetts have only recently come out. I wish they had commented and been a part of that. We always want the tribes to be a part of every phase of the survey, you know, to provide comments if they want different types of excavation in other places. We are always open to that and to take comments. So a lot of the comments, unfortunately, we're getting were after the data recovery program had been completed. I wish the tribes had responded to the MOA and data recovery program. Federal Highway did send those letters out, but it is unfortunate because we look for comments, but at the same time, we also have to respect them that if they choose not to comment, we can't force anybody to comment. We really prefer them to comment because we want to incorporate their concerns and interests in the project work that we do, and especially the surveys. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. I think we can move to the next question at that point.
Okay, I think one moment, please. Let's see, just me manage the queue here. Okay, I think we have 5 after. Did we want to take a short break for bio break, water break, leg stretch break, or do we want to continue with one more?
Yeah, I think maybe we should take a quick break so we can then get back to it after that. So we do want to, I think we are going to give everyone a little extra time because there are still a lot of questions we have to get through.
Okay.
And Alan, could you just leave up the contact information for those folks who are going to leave?
Yep, let me get to that. And then I also put a timer on the screen so folks know, oops, here we go. Wait. There we go. Let me put the timer on the screen so if folks need to step away to use the restroom or get a drink of water or whatnot, we have that. Let me just pull that up. There we go. And so I ask all the project team members to perhaps at least put yourself on mute, perhaps stop your video. And for members of the public, I have 8:06. We'll also a countdown timer on the screen. We will be back momentarily. And again, do our level best to get through all the hand raises and as many of the written questions as we possibly can. So be with you shortly. Thank you. Okay, we're coming up on time here. This is Alan Belniak with you again, returning. I'll just wait for all the members of the project team to return as well, and then we can resume. So let me move this out of the way. There was a comment, by the way, in the questions and answers about pasting the links that are on the screen now into the chat, and I've done that. So if you would like to enable chat on your screen, just outbound chat for now, feel free to copy that down, and those links may even be clickable. So the comment, again, the content, excuse me, that you see on your screen is now also available in the chat for use. We'll just give this another minute or so to let people return. Again, once Brian and other members of the team return, please turn your videos back on to let us know that you were back, and we will proceed once everyone's ready to go.
Hi, Alan, it's Brian. I just want to let you know that I'm back.
Alan, if you're trying to talk, you are muted.
I follow my own advice a little too strictly. Thank you for that. In the interest of time, we do see a couple of hands raised, and so I'm going to try to call on the net new people. We do see some folks with hands raised who have already spoken, and we certainly appreciate that. We appreciate the passion and the desire to come back on the record. We're going to, again, focus on the net new people, shift over to some text-based Q&A, and again, we'll get to as many as we possibly can. So with that, let's resume at 8:14. Rochelle Prunty, if I am saying that right, I'm going to send a command for you to open your mic, and when you do, the floor is yours for about 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Rochelle, and I'm the general manager for River Valley Co-op. And as you know, River Valley Co-op has been opposed to this project. And listening to people talking tonight, our experience was that we asked repeatedly for overnight construction because of the threat of the disruption to our business, and we had zero accommodation to this. And I just want to say, we objected before this historic site was even known. We objected informally long before the design process had come along. We objected formally when it was at 25%. Now, and our neighbors also objected to this project and had serious concerns. And now we've heard how Native American groups lost their chance for anything but removal of artifacts found because they spoke up too late. So we spoke up formally at 25%, and before that for years. So it just makes me wonder, when do you need to comment to actually get your comments seriously considered and have them taken into consideration?
Thank you. I think since that has a lot to do with project history, Alex, I'll let you handle that one in terms of the comments that were made at the design public hearing and so on and so forth.
And Brian, just quickly though, I think, we're here tonight because we want to hear and continue to hear the comments from the public. And we have throughout the past on this project and other projects. So Alex, I don't think you need to repeat all of the comments or comment history, but just know that, we're here tonight because we want to hear the comments from you. The concern about access to businesses is something that we hear on projects throughout the state, and it's something that we consider and take into consideration, and don't want to impact or inadvertently close off access. We will continue to maintain access to businesses along the corridor. But Alex, I don't know if you have anything specific to say.
I would just say in particular to this project, you're right, Rochelle, there's definitely been feedback from the public on this project throughout. And, as a result of that, after the design public hearing, MassDOT commissioned a separate third-party consultant to do the intersection control evaluation. The design team didn't actually do that study, and that was intentional so that there was an objective second review of those design assumptions that have been made and decisions that have been made earlier in the process. And, that was one example on this project of public feedback making a difference, of that study actually getting commissioned. And I would say, in regards to access to your business, there are quite detailed construction staging plans as part of this project, because roundabout construction is challenging. And there's every intent to, maintain access to all the properties adjacent to this project. Yes, people like to avoid construction zones, and that's a fact. But there is actually in this plan set a more detailed set of construction staging plans than you typically put into a project. And part of that is to mitigate the extra disruptiveness of a roundabout versus a smaller footprint design. So there's just two examples there where I think the feedback have made a difference. And I did just want to point to those and acknowledge those. But I don't want to go much further into, comment history.
Yeah, okay. Those are great points, Alex.
All right, thank you for that. Let me just manage the queue here a bit. Okay. Next name I see that looks net new to me is Rob Moss. So Rob, I'm going to send a command to you to open your mic. And when you do, you've got about 2 minutes or so with the group here.
All right, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
All right, I'm a little nervous, so bear with me, but I just have two quick things. So most of this is for Jamie. The presentation that you gave from the DOT was super clear. However, I'm reading through the archaeological report, and it seems like it's kind of backing up more of what Mr. Andrews was saying before. Just really quick, I'm quoting on the top of page 28. The study of low density sites, such as the Skibisky site, has a potential to provide information about the role of these sites within earlier late archaic settlement systems, illuminating settlement functions that may be presently unknown to archaeologists. I'm just wondering if the data recovery program really covered all of that. I know in archaeology, it's a practice to wait until less destructive methods come on, 3D imaging, that sort of thing, to make sure sites are totally, they're totally looked at without actually being destroyed. I'm wondering if that's an option. And then the other thing, really quick, is just in regards to erasure and trying to avoid that. I think tonight's a good example. The other site in Northampton at the other roundabout was unknown to most people here. That's literally erasure. I just wonder if there's any plans to avoid that, or if there could be plans to avoid that for this site. That's all. Thanks.
Jamie?
In referencing the report, I'm trying to remember the question. It was that, yes, it is a unique site. It does talk about settlement in the area, and the site for what it is very unique. It is, it was these tree throw features, and it sort of indicated how Native Americans would utilize resources throughout, the Connecticut River Valley. So it's not a village site. It's not a long-term habitation site, but what it is what makes it unique is that it's a very short window into how they utilize various resources and moved along, and not everything is a village site. And so for the time period that it's a single component, so it does indicate how the landscape is being used. I'm trying to remember from more of the question. It is, so I think a lot of the report, and so there's the first phases report, and then so the data recovery program excavation really exposed more of those two tree throw features, but it really indicated that was pretty much what the site is, and they were able to do quite an extensive mitigation excavation. So it was a unique site. As far as the other roundabout, in our project area, there wasn't any sites that I'm aware of. I know there are sites nearby that were outside of our project area and weren't going to be affected. I think there was one along the river, and one or two that were identified in that, I think it's a little public park or something right there, but they were outside of our project area. And like we talked about before, we did do a small survey in the area that was going to be impacted kind of outside of the layout a bit. But I hope I answered everything. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else. Let me know if there is anything.
Yeah, Jamie, he had just he had quoted the report that had been provided to him and mentioned that it was sort of more along the lines of what Mr. Andrews was saying, but I do think you answered that. Yeah.
Okay. The next hand I see, net new speaker is Matt Adams. And Matt, you also have at least one question in in the text-based Q&A. So I'm going to assume that you're going to kind of combine all them together with your verbal time here and your text question. So with that, I'm going to open up your mic, and then the floor is yours for a couple minutes.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions.
Sure.
The first thing I want to say is that the state of Massachusetts is we the people. We the people have been telling Mass DOT throughout this project that we do not want to see this state destroyed. Yet it seems Mass DOT is determined to do business as usual and continue on in the line of what they've always done, which is destroy sites. My question is, what exactly does data mitigation plan mean? Does it mean that you've essentially destroyed the site by way of archaeological process and that anything of archaeological value has thus been removed? Or does it mean that non-invasive techniques were utilized to record the data? My other question, I actually have two more questions. My other question is that I believe Mark pointed out, and perhaps Noam pointed out, that there were two places where archaeology hasn't been performed yet, and we don't know the full extent of the site. That needs to seriously be taken into consideration. Why isn't that happening? And my final question is, if Mass DOT has also recommended the submission of the site to the National Register, why hasn't Mass DOT taken it upon themselves to come up with another design plan after agreeing with that recommendation, after the public has told you repeatedly, we don't want this site destroyed, and then the tribes are telling you that they don't want this site destroyed?
Okay, thank you. So, all right, I got your three questions down. So Jamie, I'll let you discuss, answer the questions about the data recovery program, what that entails. I think that we've gone over that a couple times, but I'll let you breeze mention that again. And if there are other non-invasive forms of mitigation that we could perform. And then if there are other areas that need to be surveyed, that was brought up during the dialogue with Mr. Andrews. And then the issue on, why other designs haven't been discussed. We have gone over that a few times about mentioning why the roundabout was preferred over the other, selected over the other alternatives. Alex, I'll let you jump in on that if you think you need to add additional detail there. But Jamie, go ahead. So the questions were, if there are other non-invasive forms of mitigation that can be performed, and what exactly the data recovery program means, and then discussing the potential other areas that could be surveyed.
Right. So the data recovery program is a sort of a means of addressing the adverse effect on the site. And so what it is was developing basically a proposal for further excavations in order to appropriately mitigate the adverse effects. So in this case, and they can be very different. They're created for each particular site that gets to this point. So this data recovery program was designed specifically for what was identified at this site. And in this case, the proposal was for block testing, which are the 1 meter by 1 meter test units. 1 meter is about, about 3.28 feet by 3.28 feet in blocks. So excavating them unit by unit, but together opens up a larger window. So not only would it expose the two removal of the plow zone that has been, so that layer disturbed through plowing. So by sampling the plow zone, which allows you to recover any artifacts that are from that layer, but also exposing more of the features, the two tree throw features. So the block testing was done by hand, screened, then these features were exposed. And so that's a proposal that was put together. The second part of that proposal was for machine stripping of the area to try to expose more features. Yes, the difficulty of the area was that there were a lot of trees. Unfortunately, existing trees and their roots go through features. Often features appear as very ephemeral soil stains, and tree roots, especially big trees, can just go right through them, and animals often dig holes through them because the soil can be softer, and unfortunately they can be lost. So this was developed to try to balance what was appropriate. This data recovery program was presented to Federal Highway, who accepted it. It was sent to the MHC, the tribes, only the MHC commented. But in looking at other non-evasive methods, and I think they often refer to like, trying to do, kind of geophysical. The problem is also the trees and the roots, because if anytime you're trying to do ground penetrating radar or such, that's going to show up. The area is rocky in a sense, but a lot of these kind of features, especially Native American features of this old, are not going to necessarily show up. It would be challenging. So it was felt that developing the plan to try to balance, no survey is perfect, no archaeological plan is perfect, but you try to get comments from everybody. It is sampling, but you do with a data recovery plan, you try to go from sampling to excavation to the point where you're recovering sufficient information to mitigate the adverse effect. And that's something that we don't just, decide. We attempt to vet that with everybody. So was there any more? I'm trying to remember if I touched on everything.
If other areas were surveyed, but you discussed that with Mr. Andrew. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the difficulty of some of the areas are obviously the roadways. We can't survey through the roadways. We can't put with a shovel. We can't put test units through the roadways or utilities. You can do monitoring, and that has been discussed of when they're digging through a utility trench, the workers, and they're pulling out the existing pipe, looking at what the profiles look like. But unfortunately, those disturbances have already occurred. So there's a lot of discussion that's even still ongoing. And Federal Highway is handling that with the consulting parties. So, I think that's anything else? Anything else, Brian?
Yeah, there was a question on design that we have addressed in previous comments. But, I think a key thing to mention is that, we have presented all of these alternatives to various, regulatory officials that have jurisdiction over this project. And, we do have a signed MOA between MHC and Federal Highway that, Jamie, correct me if I have wrong terminology here, but the tribes were made aware and given a chance to comment on all of those things through the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 part, and ultimately everything that culminated into that MOA that you talked about. So we did present all of these alternatives, and what came out of that process and out of that analysis was that we have the ability to proceed with the roundabout alternative under these regulations. All right, can we move to the next question?
Yes. Couple questions comments and questions that came in that are thematically related to things we've already talked about. So I'm just going to group them together. I believe we've touched upon all or most of this. So I'll read them in and I'll pause if the project team wants to respond to them and add on, feel free. If traffic circles and roundabouts are useful, how do other states manage traffic without using traffic circles? And why are speed limits a topic of concern when this is not considered a high-speed area? And isn't this a 30 to 35 mile an hour speed limit in the first place? Why could we just not lower the speed limits through this area?
Alan, I'll just jump in and say, in general, FHWA Federal Highway endorses roundabouts as a safety countermeasure, and I think you're seeing them developed in other states as well more frequently now. It's a growing and evolving practice, but Massachusetts is a little bit more advanced, and maybe because of our history of having rotaries, which for the record are not the same thing. But roundabouts are a treatment MassDOT's accepted, but it's really off federal guidance, and that same federal guidance is being adopted in other states. I want to comment on the speed thing, but I know Corey or Andy may want to weigh in on the roundabout right after that. In terms of this location, we have speeds in excess of 45 miles an hour on North King Street. If you think about North King Street coming down from Hatfield heading south, it's down gradient. When you're down gradient like that, it's harder to stop. So those higher speeds are kind of compounded a little bit in that sense. I think the speed limits are posted 35, maybe 40. I don't recall, but there's definitely running speeds are in excess of the posted speed limits. Just as a general practice, enforcement doesn't work. You can't just put a cop out there and have them clocking everybody going by and writing a bunch of tickets. We have to design our roadways so that people drive them at the speeds they were intended. And in this instance, the roundabout plays to that, where it is a speed control mechanism that calms traffic out here. There's legal barriers to simply dropping a speed limit for one, but simply dropping a speed limit has been shown time and time again to not effectively control speed.
Alex, I think you hit it pretty well on the nail. More and more, like you said, more and more roundabouts are being built across the nation. Each year, almost 300 new roundabouts are being popped up across the nation. The number since like the year 2000, for example, we have another consultant who runs these reports on roundabouts. Year 2000, you had like around 500 roundabouts in the U.S. But then that number almost, multiply that by 10. That's how we have around the U.S. now at this moment. Like Alex said, it is the Federal Highway Department. They do recognize roundabout as a safety countermeasure. So to mitigate crashes and also mitigate speed. It is a great way to slow speeds down. And again, we need to have engineering practices in order to establish speed limits. We can't just go out there to artificially lower a speed limit. The posted speed limit out there on King Street is 40 miles per hour right now, and we can't just go out there and slap a 30 miles per hour. Number one, again, you have to have engineering practices in order to establish that speed limit in order to make it legally enforceable. And number two, if we just artificially put a speed limit there, no one's going to follow that speed limit just because that's not the running speed of the road.
Great, thank you for that. Another question came in. This came in from Greg Skibisky during the presentation, so we may have covered it during the prior Q&A when we were addressing Mr. Skibisky, but I'll read it anyway. Why are historical resources not part of considerations? What alternatives were considered after the discovery of the Native American site? None were shown in the MEPA filing, which considered the Native American site in detail as part of it. So I don't know if there's any net new to add.
Yeah, I mean, just to recap briefly, you know, we did present a swath of alternatives to Federal Highway in the Mass Historical Commission, and the tribes were looped in on that process through Section 106. So, you know, we did come up with a way to, you know, mitigate for the roundabout, and it was determined that, you know, through the 106 process that those impacts were unavoidable in terms of, you know, being able to meet the needs and deficiencies at that intersection. So we have said that a few times, and yeah, I don't think that anybody needs to add anything there, right? Andy or Alex?
Okay. Andy, all right, great. Okay, so just jumping also into the list here, looking for a net new name. Eileen, GP, asks, can we please have a link to the archaeology slide? So it looks like, I think, just asking if there's a way to provide that link and maybe separately outside of this meeting. So I'm not sure if the project team can address that.
Well, we have these slides, Brian, will be up on the website too.
We can do that.
Okay.
We can add these slides to the project website.
Great, thank you for that. I was looking through here, and we've done that one. Sorry, let's see. Just getting through some of these. Another question about why a roundabout versus a traffic signal, which I think we've gotten to that one already. Barbara Blumenthal asks, what is the estimated actual construction time, and will travel always be possible through the intersection?
Alex, I'll let you take that one.
I think the scheduler pegged this total construction around a 3-year process, you know, but recognize the actual intersection reconfiguration, and, you know, in the middle of the road would be more of a standard construction window, probably 1.5 years or so of different disruptions. But to the part about travel always being possible, I think there's a phase where we're restricting like the largest trucks from being able to go through because they just can't make the maneuvers. But passenger cars, normal vehicles, even the smaller trucks, absolutely. You know, other than in any construction project, sometimes there's, you know, overnight can't go through type of situations. But generally speaking, traffic will be allowed through this intersection for the duration, and the most disruptive work will be concentrated down to probably a year and a half type construction window. Other than that, the rest of the construction period is, you know, work being done outside of existing roadways or utility work or things of that nature, which just require localized, you know, one-way traffic alternating, things like that.
Okay. Amy Martin asks a safety-related question. What is the data on the number of crashes at that intersection, and how does that data compare to other similar intersections in the Northampton area?
Alex, I think you did mention a figure on, you know, analyzed traffic accidents. So I'll let you speak on that.
Yeah, we touched on the question was more about the number of fatalities before,
right.
but I highlighted some numbers in terms of one period of time, like 2013 to 2017, that was studied in the intersection control evaluation. Off the top of my head, I don't have comparative rates across the city and the state kind of, you know, on hand. I would reiterate, and I think I tried to convey this in my presentation, it's the nature of the accidents at this location as opposed to necessarily the recurrence of accidents. And it's that higher speed right angle collision that became the focus of the safety considerations here. So a little bit of a general answer. I don't have the numbers available. It is all publicly available information though.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question or comment about how signals versus roundabouts. I believe we've touched upon that earlier. Let's see. Anthony Signoli asks, first Anthony comments that he said that Jameson may have already answered the question, but just wants to, Jameson, if you could please explain, what mitigated means for folks when you talk about using the word mitigated or mitigation in your responses.
No problem. So anytime there's an eligible site and it's determined through this process it's eligible, there will be an unavoidable adverse effect. You have to develop a program that is sufficient to mitigate the information, and that can be different for different sites. Some sites, that are much larger, it could be excavating 5%. In this case, mitigating involved developing the block testing, getting sufficient information, which is coordinated through Federal Highway and the MHC, but recovering enough information on the type of artifacts, because the attempt is you can never recover 100% of everything that's out there. I mean, it's not possible, but you're trying to recover sufficient information of the artifact assemblage, the type of features, encapsulating the site with negative shovel test pits, really trying to define it, but recover the sufficient, again, of information. What constitutes mitigation can vary. In this case, it was exposing the two tree throw features entirely, sampling them, recovering, collecting soil from them to do pollen analysis, different kind of analysis. So it's not just the excavation, it's recovering artifacts, but it's also includes the analysis on the artifacts, the analysis on the feature material recovered from the feature, the soil. Is there pollen that tells you the time of year that they were there? Is there residue on the artifacts that indicate what they were hunting? That kind of information was part of the analysis. So a lot of it is developing, what is enough based on what the site is. And you could have much more complicated sites that require a lot more of the data recovery plan, either more sampling and less excavation or of a feature in its entirety. And it can be challenging. So, data recovery is meant to mitigate, but what that means is, what's sufficient excavation analysis as defined by a plan and as agreed upon by everybody in a signed MOA. I think that's everything. Was there anything else? Second question part of it?
No, they're just asking you to explain what you meant by mitigated.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Another question about, sorry, lost it. Here we go. About the roundabout, but a little bit different. The question is there another way to install a roundabout, but without disturbing the land with Native American artifacts? For example, could you consider moving the location of it further south? So I think they're just asking about an alternative alignment, not necessarily contesting the actual measure roundabout versus signal, but just changing the alignment.
Yeah, that is a unique question in terms of shifting the alignment. Alex, can you speak towards that?
Yeah, I mean, I just address it in the context of there's been similar questions about, can it move? Can it move? What are the, can you weigh the impacts against what else is going on? And this proposed intersection is generally, in the existing intersection location, which is, how these things are approached, because that's where there's the most existing right of way and therefore the least private property impact surrounding it. I think on this particular site, you're dealing with a grade that drops from north to south. And so, you're kind of contending with that. The existing intersection location's a pretty good spot on from a vertical perspective in terms of where you might site the roundabout or a signal, or, any kind of an intersection treatment here. You start looking east and west. Obviously, the concerns to the west are well established. To the east, you've got private property, and then the Interstate 91 right away, which is a line of no trespass. So, the location is pretty well fixed based on a lot of the topography out there and the some of the other unmovable type situations.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Let's see. There's a handful of questions about notification, about when and how it happened, and who was notified, and whether or not certain members were specifically invited to speak or actually be presenters, such as like representatives of some of the tribes. Brian, I'm not sure if you want to speak to that broadly, because that does cover a good handful of those questions. They're all like thematically related.
Yeah.
We maybe offer up one overall statement to address those.
Yeah, so we did have the public informational website go live on the 28th of January, which an email blast was sent out, and I believe even the cities had a legal ad run in the local paper, and within that, it also advertised the meeting for tonight, and in terms of getting other speakers involved, this is really up to the proponents of the project. In this case, Mass DOT and the city of Northampton, other proponents. So we're really not going to ask members of other stakeholders or other agencies and the tribes. We're not going to ask them to have a speaking role, specifically because we're presenting on the project and what we've done to date, and we do coordinate with them in other means. So I'll end it there, but we really wanted to keep the presentation to Mass DOT and the city, and we wouldn't ask the tribes to specifically have a speaking role in this meeting, but we do want to be able to have an open discussion with them as much as possible.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Brian. I think we touched. Amy Martin has a question. I think we touched upon it earlier when I believe when Rochelle was speaking, but for any of the changes that are possible, have you worked with the impacted businesses and residents to mitigate the impact on their operations? And also mentions overnight construction. I think we touched upon that. Not sure if there's anything that new the team wants to add.
I don't think we need to add anything there.
Okay. All right. Let me find another question here. Adele Franks is asking a question about the diagram where we discuss the four-way intersection and the number of conflict points. Adele asks, why does the diagram show a four-way intersection when this is a three-way intersection? Wouldn't the number of conflict points be less than a three-way?
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, that one was taken from the new MassDOT Roundabout Guide book. So she's correct, or they're correct, that the number would be different, but it still would be fewer for the roundabout than for the three-way intersection. And I think what's critical is the types of crashes that can occur. With a three-way, you can still have an angle crash that occurs with a left turn, and that impact and the speed at which the vehicles are moving when that crash, if it were to occur, the outcome is much more severe when compared to a roundabout.
Great, thanks for that. Just looking for some net new names here. Again, I appreciate all the comments. Again, any ones we don't read will certainly be shared with the project team. We're just trying to focus on the names that we've not heard from yet or read out loud. George K offers not a question, but a comment. George K says, I applaud the decision to move forward with the roundabout installation. The new design will dramatically slow auto traffic at this important gateway to the city. In addition, it will provide a much safer route for pedestrians and cyclists through this intersection. I trust the DRP, as described, will safeguard the native artifacts. So George, thanks for that comment. I do have a hand raised, net new hand raised from someone who's not yet spoken yet. That's Alex Risley or Alex Risley Schroeder. So Alex, I'm going to send a command for you to open your mic, and when you do, you've got about 2 minutes.
Great, thanks so much. I wondered, do you know or are you aware that 55,000 people have signed a petition against this happening, and that hundreds and maybe even thousands have taken the time to write letters to weigh in during the MEPA public comments period until you shut it down? You said that this is a public comment period that puts you in compliance with the regulations, but how do you expect the opposition from tribes, the public, the neighbors to impact the decision of whether to move forward to destroy this important historical site and disrupt important local businesses costing multiple millions of dollars?
Alex, I think I'll kick that to you to discuss we'll start with the impacts to businesses and the costs there. I think you had, answered some Rochelle's question earlier, but maybe you could reiterate that a little bit.
Yeah, I guess, there were a few individual efforts I highlighted. Well, to Rochelle, I highlighted that there are a fairly comprehensive set of construction staging plans that take into consideration the need for continued access to businesses out here. That's one. Another was in response to public comments. Additional study was done, and actually that Y intersection concept was also looked at as a result of the public comment. I know there was engagement with the transmission shop in terms of impacts to their driveway and potential impacts to operations during construction with deliveries. I know there was direct coordination there. And I'm only citing, a few examples that are on the top of my head. I'm not trying to be necessarily say that I'm hitting on all of them. So, this coordination's ongoing. The city was dealing directly with some abutters during construction as well. Mass DOT has dealt with some abutters, construction design. Mass DOT has dealt with some of the abutters during design as well. And I think, this meeting is evidence that the ears are still open. So these are the concerns that the design team needs to continue to hear.
Alex, I'll jump back in that, this public meeting is sort of in, like what you said, it is in response to the petition. It is in response to all of the public comments we received through the MEPA process. And this is not like a legal requirement. We're doing this because we feel that we really need to sort of get the best information out there that we have and make our sort of process as transparent as we possibly can. We do have to refile with MEPA, and there will be another public comment period there. So, and that is something that is more on the lines of a legal requirement. But we really do want to do it more than just what's the bottom line and what the bare minimum for public involvement. That's why we enacted this. That's why we got the public informational website up, back in late January. We're doing what we can to sort of present everything out there, like I said earlier, as transparently as possible. So I hope that folks can sort of appreciate that we're doing the best we can and sort of, engaging the public from here on out because we have heard your concerns.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, I'm just looking at the time here. We got 5 of 9. I know we mentioned going to about 9 o'clock. For anyone's hand raised, the hands that are raised that I'm seeing are folks that have already spoken, and we certainly appreciate that. If you have a net new question or follow on, and you have not yet added it, pardon me, into the Q&A box, please do so. That way we have a record of what you're trying to say. So I'm going to skim through the Q&A again to try to find some folks whose names I've not read off yet. To try to kind of balance this out as much as I can. We've got a comment or a question, excuse me, from Sarah, Sarah, no last name, asking, why not make Hatfield Street one way from North King to Cook Ave? There are ample ways to avoid a left-hand turn off of Hatfield. The additional carriage could be used as a bike path / sidewalk.
Okay, Alex, can you discuss the one-way alternative that was mentioned there?
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting proposal, and I say that genuinely. There are significant traffic concerns downstream at King Street and Damon Road coming in. You know, I think there'd be concern in a scenario like that, that you wouldn't be able to manage all the traffic in the network. I think people that are coming from the west, maybe get oriented here, instead of having to go all the way down into that intersection to turn around and head north, you know, that they're able to use Hatfield Street to kind of bypass that congested area. You know, I don't know if anybody else wants to comment more on overall network planning in the city, but yeah, I mean, from my perspective, you've got a lot of traffic issues already. And if you were to reroute additional trips into those other intersections, that would be problematic in and of itself.
Okay, thank you for that. Just looking at another, let's see. The question asks, will the video of this meeting be made available to the public later?
I don't think that's something we've considered yet. So I will get back. I think we do need to talk about that, and we will get back to everyone in terms of how we plan to, you know, provide some type of transcript.
Okay.
We should be able to, though, Brian, from a technology perspective. So.
Yes. Yep. It is recorded and everything. So.
Yep.
Yeah, that's definitely a strong possibility.
Okay. Another question from, a question from Laura Wallace. I'm not saying another question. I don't believe I've read a question of hers yet. Laura comments, there's always a solution. DOT could simply eliminate this intersection altogether and reroute traffic. Why not do this?
Alex or Andy, do you want to handle that one?
Or what, is Wayne still on from the town? I don't know if there's more of a local perspective.
Yeah, I can address. I mean, I think this is similar to what Alex said before about if we made Hatfield one way, it would send more traffic to Bridge Road, King Street, which is already a problematic intersection, both from a traffic flow and a safety standpoint. So it's not really desirable from that standpoint. And we know that people would end up taking shortcuts. They'd cut through Walmart and Big Y and potentially create new safety problems. And generally, what we're looking for is actually a network to distribute traffic out rather than concentrating traffic at a few key points.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, let me just scrolling through here. Sorry, I'm just trying to find names from names I've not read out yet. Let's see. Comment asks what can be done from Peter Hansen. What can be done to avoid irreparable damage? Please continue to engage with Mr. Andrews and with those whose ancestors were native to the Connecticut River Valley, but do not have tribal recognition. Auto safety is an important matter, but pedestrian safety does not appear to be a factor. Commenting that rotaries discourage pedestrian movement. What value this as opposed to destruction of the ancient history of New England?
I'd like to address that if I can. Again, from the city's motivation, this is more a project for us that's driven by bike and ped safety than it is than anything else. That the Commonwealth has a policy of people on bikes and peds should be comfortable on any surface street. Northampton has a complete streets policy that basically says the same thing. And yet it is, someone's taking their life in their hands to try to walk along North King Street or Hatfield. So that's really what drove us to this, is the need to deal with bike and pedestrian safety. Obviously, reducing car crashes is also important, but people just can't go places. So one of the things that the traffic crashes underestimates is we know that people self-censor, so people don't walk and bicycle there because it's not safe.
Thanks, Wayne. And I will add, there was a comment about continuing to speak with Mr. Andrews as well as the tribes. And, that is a requirement that Mass DOT has to follow through the MOA with the Mass Historical Commission and Federal Highways. Section 106 is an ongoing process, as Jamie mentioned. And, there are still, there's still stipulations that we need to follow through on. So we will definitely be doing that.
Okay, let's see here.
And Alan, we are at that 9 o'clock hour, and I just want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I don't want to continue the meeting and leave out people who I know have to jump off.
Sure.
But if there's another question you want, maybe read one more question or take one more comment.
Let's see. I'm trying to find one that a lot of the questions that come in are thematically related, where we've covered maybe 85 or 90% of what the question is. I'm not trying to be dismissive. I just want to try to find something that's net new that the whole audience can benefit from the answer from the project team. So I'm just trying to find one. There's no, let's see. Actually, there was one here about have you considered buying the parking lot at that corner so you can shift the project away from the historical site? I think we talked about that a moment ago about shifting the alignment. So I just don't know if there's any more to add, just because a specific location was mentioned, the parking lot. So
that's correct. We did mention that, Alan, and we did cite some larger adverse impacts to that particular property.
Okay. Okay, so just one more announcement for those of you who there are a couple of hands raised. It's some folks who have spoken. Certainly appreciate that. Please drop your questions or comments into the Q&A box, because again, this is completely archived and collected, and I can share it with the project team. So with that, I'll hand it back to Brian or Andrew for the next steps.
Yeah, thank you. So, all of this is, part of the public record. So we do have this meeting recorded. We'll find a way to get that out public facing. And, all of the comments, although we might not have gotten to them today, we will have those on our record. So we will be working those into all the other comments we've received through the public comment portal, as well as via email. So we will be working on responses to comments after today, and we'll allow that public comment period to continue through March 8th. So folks should be looking for responses to comments sometime after that date, and we'll also discuss other means to get information out to the public, but we'll call this sort of an ongoing process. And then, after that, at some point, our intent is to refile with MIPA, like I explained in the presentation. We're not ready to commit to a date to that at all just yet, because there's a lot of comments to get through at this time. So we do want to be mindful of that, and we do want to make sure that everybody feels like their comments have been responded to in some way or another.
I'll just end, Alan, with thanking everyone for joining us. We had over 80 people at the beginning of the call. A lot of you hung on till the bitter end here. This is certainly not the end of the process. We've got the open comment period through the end of March. We've got an interactive website, which we think has been very useful on other projects. And we don't just intend on taking the comments and archiving them, that there's really a back and forth with you all, with the folks at the municipal level in Northampton, as well as the federal highway folks. So, and through federal highway with the tribal nations. So it's something that we appreciate the opportunity to engage. I'm always most proud of having public meetings that people attend, that there is this engagement where there are these challenging issues. And so thanks to Alan and the team and everybody for pulling this together.
Okay. With that, I'm going to stop the sharing and stop the recording. Thank you all for your time, and have a good rest of the evening.